It's all good. So we have a videographer right here. We're going to get Susan's back, not my back. Hello.
Okay, so where does your first speaker? Is this Gary Miller?
No, the first one, is the species, the grassland, the Forest Service,
Okay.
and then Gary Miller is the big PowerPoint.
Okay, all right. So I'll come in around this time. Do you want this mic so that you can hear it well on the recording, or does the agency updates matter?
No, we're good. There's too many people. It's going to go around the room. And,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. We're good.
Okay, and so then I just don't know if you're going to want us to come in and switch out the locale.
Oh, that's between those guys. They can do it.
Those two can do it. What about in the afternoon?
Nothing. I don't think we have anything in the afternoon.
Okay. If somebody does need one, all you got to do is use these. Great. Okay.
We'll probably use that.
It will, not for recording. One, two. Are you? You should be good. You know where we're at.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. There we go. Really?
Appreciate your attendance. We'll start out with introduction. I'm Bob Budd. I'm the chair of the State House Implementation Team. In my real life, I manage the wildlife and the University of Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust.
Everybody reading, I think it's going to be natural resource policy. No balance of my term commissioner.
Susan Child, State Land Office.
Joy Bannon, Wyoming Wildlife Federation.
Lucas Keeler with the Oil and Gas Commission. I'm no special. Wheelchair, some gas, I'm sure. Brian, not with the National Wildlife. Good morning, Jason Bob. U.S. Coaches. Good morning, Billy. Brian Johnson, U.S.
Okay, hold on.
Sounds hard to pay. Anybody got the spare? Linda Beaver, American Cohen, John Kennedy, Wyoming Manager, Senator, Wyoming. Does anyone have an extra helmet? Hallelujah. Who are you with?
Fish and Wildlife Service National State Coast Conservation Program.
Tom, we'll just start over with you. Comprehensive wildlife thing. Frank Cooper West, David Cooper, Martinez. Wayne County Independent. Richard Sander, Fire File Services. Travis D. Colorado Land Association. Black Sheep, Melanie Black Hills,
Agriculture, Debt and Energy.
and the dark up. There's mobile, or use. Jumping out of SWCA. Aaron Moore with the Institute for Development Development. Brandon Smith, Vice President. Steve Meyer, Field Service Centers. Palmer Manufacturer. Eric Belda, Custom Drinking Water. Wilbur Jones, Article. Will Bickford, Key Neighbors. Nicholas Graff, Wages. Josh Mullen, Tim Fish. Chuck Haber, Pierce City. Matt Cole with SWCA. Rich Atkins with Cedarville. Matt Ryan, Scott Gable, David Fish. Esther, Kansas City. All right, thank you, everybody. Be sure and sign in so we have your correct email, contact information, Mary, logistics.
Okay, there is a cafeteria here. If you only have an hour for lunch, so if we can use that cafeteria, it's pretty good. Otherwise, there is a map with a couple of locations that are nearby if you want to prefer fast food. For wireless login, when you're connecting, it's all lowercase. The username is CCI guest, and the password is jellyfish, all lower caps or lower letters. And I don't really know where the rest western side, they're somewhere out there, so.
They're not in
Down the
this
hall.
When you get in the hall, make a right.
Okay, thank you.
You guys down the hall, please.
Thank you, Maria.
Well, some people already scouted out the balance. Okay, let's start out with agency updates. I'm going to ask Jeremiah to lead that. Maybe he and I will tag team this a little, not only the agency, but also kind of where the legislature is. We've had a flurry of activity, but unfortunately, it amounted to a lot of wing flapping so far and no takeoff. So,
Sure. In terms of the legislative update, I shared with you a copy of a joint resolution that was introduced by Senator Gibbs and Representative Speaker Brown. It's something that the genesis of it comes out of a legislative group that's been working across the West, but it comes out of Utah and some litigation funding that they've put forward and have been trying to pursue additional time to demonstrate efficacy of their plan. That resolution was up in the Senate Ag Committee last night. Three gentlemen here spoke on that bill last night, and ultimately it failed to receive a second to move forward. So it gets done for the session, and I don't disparage Senator Gibbs or Speaker Brown relative to that. Members of this team, they're trying to do good work. They're just some ill-advised people out there trying to move those things forward. So that resolution is there. There have been a couple of other things related to grouse. In the Appropriations Committee, the chairman brought forward $750,000 towards cage grouse breeding, to have it be somewhat of a competition where you would have different pots that would go out to different researchers. And with it, one would receive $1 million as a prize. And that did initially get support from the Appropriations Committee. After further consideration around Robin, that has been removed. The other part of this is that there is, we expect some funding coming forward for additional work. You remember last year they gave us $1.2 million for sage grouse research and other activities. We expect they will give us similar funding this budget session. And then we have had conversations for $300,000 to be specific to economic analysis within the state of Wyoming. And the third component of that would be $1 million towards litigation, not specific to any particular side of the litigation, but a pot that would be at the governor's discretion to use as we move forward. So we anticipate that will be a part of appropriation. So a total of $2.5 million.
The only thing I would add, when the grouse farming amendment was removed, one good thing did happen. The initial round, they adopted an amendment that I offered them. They had created a task force, set out a budget for a task force, separate task force to do this. We were reminded of this group exists and that there actually is already a committee working on it. So the language that they put in would have directed it to us. Now, when they took the funding out for the farming and they put the $2.5 million in, that will all flow through here just as we did it last year, even though there was no mandate from the legislature. This time the legislature has said this group is directed to do the study or analysis that I asked Senator Hicks to chair at our last meeting. So you have a legislative mandate, if you will, that says get this done and do it correctly. Concurrent with that, at the regional safe routes task force meeting in Denver last week, we asked and they agreed the states that have done this to start do a roll up for us of what they've done. So Washington State, for example, does translocations to try and bolster the populations they have. Colorado has tried raising gunnisons and graders. Utah has also done that. So there will be a multi-state group working concurrent with the subgroup that we appointed from the SGIT to look at that particular issue, identify what the potential risks are, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the only other issue. Okay, Mark, do you want to?
Sure, a couple of things. I remember the last time we met, for the appropriation bill, the riders in there. Basically, the appropriation bill rider says the Fish and Wildlife cannot spend money to draft or publish a final rule on sage-grouse. However, we're still under court order to come up with a decision by September 30th. And so we're moving forward as planned. We recently held a meeting here in Denver, down in Denver, down in Denver with the writing team that's writing the species assessment. They are working hard on that. We are planning a couple of meetings in May to come up with our final recommendation for Dan Ash. So May is actually the time we're going to make that decision as to which way we're going to go. The rest of the time will be spent on briefing it up to the headquarters, up to the point of Dan Ash. So just a heads up that we are moving forward. As far as Fish and Wildlife is concerned, nothing has changed. We're going to make a decision. We just won't be able to publish a draft rule or a final one.
But we will have to make a declaration to the court.
And the declaration will be a month before you can actually publish the rule, right?
We can't, can't publish.
Correct.
So we have to provide to the court what our recommendation or what our director decides
Right.
by September 30th of 2015. So that we aren't in violation of the court order.
Okay, so it's the same time.
Yes.
So the appropriations bill goes September 30th. September 30th. The previous court order, I think, was supposed to be done by September 1st. There's a 30-day slop in there, is what it amounts to.
So, bottom line is it depends on if Congress repeats what they
Typically,
next
right.
fiscal year.
Typically appropriations budgets go for 2 years. But they can always step in and do what they wish whenever they wish. So I'll just follow quickly on Myron.
But the rider cannot, they would have to renew the rider. Right? Even if they do a continued CR, the rider has to be done again.
So just to follow up with Mark, we've got a slew of people that are now 125% working on the analysis and the review, including modeling efforts, going through the conservation database. We started our analysis of the over 6,000 efforts that entered into that database. So you're not going to see us much. We are backing off after this week. We will become fairly non-existent on the BLM and Forest Service planning efforts simply because we have to shift our focus. And they're far enough along that they're irrelevant. So.
Do you want to quickly tell them what the modeling is?
Sure. Basically, what we're doing, we brought Kevin Doherty down from our office in North Dakota, and he is looking at different scenarios for different threats to the species based on different projections and assumptions for it. So we're looking at what could happen with energy development based on current projections, what we've collected from BLM, Forest Service, and the energy industry on what they think might be projections, and looking to see how it's going to project into the future. With all the associated caveats of a model. It's a model, it's not the truth. It just helps inform us. We're also doing that agricultural conversion and for wildfire. Looking at all these data that we can pull together and help us understand how these things may move forward into the future. For wildfire, we're pulling on the WAPA effort that was led by Ken Mayer, looking at resilience and the fire cycle, and relative to soil moisture, those kind of things. So it's an effort simply to try to get us more information that may inform us in those areas of uncertainty, where it's really hard to predict exactly what may happen.
Buddy.
At BLM, just about, I guess I've got about three things that I wanted to share with you this morning. The first of which is, we continue the work on our plans, revisions, and amendments, as you all know. And we have folks in the department and BLM Washington office and here working to put some finishing touches on a few remaining issues. And I guess to cut to the chase, in terms of timelines, our Washington office review will be occurring from about May 20th to June the 3rd on those documents. Proposed RMP, Resource Management Plan, and FEIS, or Final EIS, will be published June the 26th on or about. And records of the decisions signed by August 31st, 2018. Pam Murdoch is going to be in a little later to talk a little bit about adaptive management, so we'll be updating you on that. And Jenny Morton, who's not feeling well, she may or may not be here, was going to touch a little bit on mitigation for me. One of the things I would also point out is that we do have a young man by the name of Matt Magaletti that's come from our Washington office to fill in behind Johanna Munson. He's serving as our regional project manager and doing a terrific job in the interim while Johanna is away. So just a side note on personnel there. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that the BLM has created a national sage grouse implementation team, of which I'm a member. That team is made up of all of our deputy state directors for resources around the Bureau. And it's chaired by Raul Morales, our Nevada DSD. And we initially met in September in Reno. And first meeting was a little clunky. We kind of centered our discussions on what management actions would be implemented nationally, regionally, and locally. There was interest with the group in what Lander was doing. As you know, Lander is pretty well out the door. So I shared some insight on what they might expect at implementation. For example, making sure you have your administrative record in order in the event you're FOIA or you're litigated, things of that nature. I talked about the training that they had gone through with cooperators as well as staff. Cooperating agency meetings, and they're also doing a newsletter, for example. So I just tried to share some of the Wyoming insight with Great Basin states. We also talked about capacity building. That's a pretty big item because we have committed to a lot of things in these plan revisions and amendments, and it's going to take resources to make those happen. So we were looking at the challenges ahead of staffing and resources to get the job done. We identified 9 major workloads in that effort, one of which was monitoring, for example, which is going to be a huge effort. We met again in Denver in November, and we talked about budget and priorities again, trying to put a little more meat on the bones, if you will. And we also talked about governance. And I wanted to take just a brief moment to elaborate on that a little bit. I did explain the fact that here in Wyoming, we have a governance that's been in place to address this issue for some time. I talked about our interagency working group that meets periodically at the BLM state office. And I also talked about this body and the importance of this body and the role that it plays here in Wyoming. And I also talked about the local working groups, how important those are. So before they entered into this long discussion about that, I just wanted to put that out there because quite frankly, we are down the road in a lot of ways in the state on the topic of governance. There was discussion by the group about the establishment of a regional executive oversight committee, and that would be made up of BLM and other agencies, state representatives, and so forth. But so anyway, that's out there, and I'll come back to that momentarily. Also tied to the discussion on governance was and to the discussion on priorities was the creation of grazing permit renewal teams around the western states that have sage-grouse habitat. And the concern there is our director is concerned with the backlog of grazing permit renewals around the Bureau. And obviously, grazing permit renewals and so forth are one mechanism by which we'll be implementing some of our conservation actions in these plans. And so that item was of particular interest. And what they're looking at is, quite frankly, coming up with teams, if you will. The idea, or what's being proposed, is coming up with a state office team, an interdisciplinary team, and a district or a zone team that would focus on monitoring and assessment, such that they would feed the state office team that would be helping us catch up on permit renewal and obviously implementing conservation actions. Field offices would continue to do what they ordinarily do. So the idea of being that these new teams would be additive to what the field office is already doing. I did personally push back on that based upon being an old range retread myself, and just from a common sense perspective, I felt like if we have a backlog in this state and we have a workload in this state, if there's additional money out there, give it to us and let us assess that workload in the best way to build capacity. And that could be just by enhancing our field office resources, that kind of thing. So that's still kind of up in the air. And we, between November the 24th and December 17th, I kind of canvassed our leadership team to see where they were on it. And they're very much of the mind that I am, and that is, let us determine what's best for dealing in Wyoming. But if held at gunpoint and we had to have these teams, I suspect we would have something similar to the other states. I provided that feedback and many, many reasons why I would prefer that we not do that. So that's got to play out still. We had a conference call on the 14th of January that was critical also because it was taking this idea of these teams and so forth and coming up with a budget. And it is pretty spendy. And so that was put together and will be presented to our executive leadership team in February. As for this executive oversight, getting back to the oversight committee, this is separate again from these permit renewal teams. I guess there's a hope to have these this oversight committee set up by the time the rods are issued, and as I said earlier, I think in June. They're looking to host a meeting with the stakeholders or the people that will be participating on this committee in March. And there's outreach going on to try to assemble this executive oversight committee. Aside from that, another important item that's out there is the agency is working on a national implementation guidebook. This is basically a Reader's Digest version of a desk guide for staff in the field. It's similar to, I think, what the Forest Service utilizes. And I also provided some pushback there because I feel very strongly about implementation being a local level thing. In other words, please don't give us a policy up here that fences us in and allows the people that develop the plan to implement it in a fashion that's appropriate for that field office. Other than that, the secretary did issue an executive order on January the 6th, which was kind of important. It had to do with a comprehensive strategy to protect and restore sagebrush lands threatened by rangeland fire. In our last meeting, I kind of shared with you that myself and others did go to Boise to the Fire and Invasive Conference. And this strategy and so forth is sort of an offshoot of that conference. Essentially what we're looking at is a strategy that primarily affects the Great Basin region. Why do I share that here and why do we care? Well, frankly, as I said in our last meeting, that large sucking sound of fuels dollars from BLM headed westward does affect us in relationship to fuels projects that are grouse related here in Wyoming. We have very minimal money for fuels treatment. So this strategy basically is going to be focused on reducing size, severity, and cost of rangeland fire, addressing the spread of cheatgrass and other invasives, and pre-positioning wildland fire management resources. Quite frankly, we do that already here in Wyoming anyway. We do it here to protect core habitat, and we are very thoughtful about how we do that each year. Aside from that, the Secretary's order also establishes a top-level rangeland fire task force. It's going to be chaired by Interior Deputy Secretary Mike Connor, including 5 other assistants, and it kind of lays out the goals and timelines for completing their work. So a fair amount going on, as you can well imagine, as we approach the straightaway to try to get these plans done. So again, with that, if anybody's interested in that secretarial order, myself, Mark, or Pat can provide that to you. So that's all I got.
Yeah, my question goes back to the beginning of your report, buddy. It relates to I know you're twin daughters of the same mother, Fish and Wildlife Service. I get the feeling sometimes there might be a different father involved. So I'm concerned about the June 3rd.
Very politely put.
I'm working on it. Timelines come to the forefront for me a lot lately for some strange reasons. But what I'm concerned about is how do we consider the final EISs and RMPs when we have a May date for conclusion on Fish and Wildlife Service's considerations and a June release date. I'm sure that's just how Neil would
Any
relate.
questions?
I mean,
Can I take a shot at this?
please do.
The communication is endless. It's every day, all day. And I think in an effort to try to address that, Brian, I don't know how explicitly I could, take that down and answer that, but just in a general sense, the communication that's going on is,
Unprecedented?
in my mind, it is.
And I would echo that, the amount of communication that I see there, but the amount of communication that I see amongst the whole group, and that's not just Wyoming, that's other states and at all levels up to the Secretary's office. I personally am talking to the Secretary's office almost daily, to Director Ash at least weekly, and so lots going on, and certainly unprecedented scale.
But you hear my question is, I see all that and am included more than is even healthy. I want to know that this group recognizes that will be in consideration in the May considerations. Absolutely. Not that we're going to move to a conclusion without 60% of the landscape.
So let me add a couple things, Brian, I think are important to that. At the task force meeting last week, that topic came up, and Dan Ash in particular expressed a fairly earnest plea to everybody to get data in. That was parsed down to 2 pieces. One is the data side, which really is not that big a challenge. It's a matter of people getting it in, and that's happening now. Wyoming's current on that. There are a couple other states that needed to get that taken care of. The second part of that was that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states that will probably issue their executive orders within the next 4 to 6 weeks. And they're all dependent on their own process. So for instance, Montana, it's written. Fish has that. They know what it says and what it does. They can analyze that. It won't be adopted until mid-April when their legislature is done. Oregon has theirs drafted. They've gone through most of their public process. Their legislature isn't done until June, so it won't actually be signed, but that draft has already moved forward. The expectation is that those drafts will not be altered radically. Colorado probably will have a draft within the next 2 to 3 weeks. Utah's is done, and Nevada's is done. So if they will all converge, and all of that information will be made available to students.
And the other point of clarification too, even though we make our recommendation on our director in May, we have to consider any information that comes in after that could significantly influence. I mean, I've been working on this BLM Forest Service planning stuff since it started. I remember sitting with Raoul on a hill in Bozeman, Montana, talking about how we had done 3 years ago. So that communication is there, but if there's a miracle cure for cheatgrass that comes out in July, you're darn right we're going to consider that in our recommendation decision. The reason why we have so much time between when we make our recommendation and when we have to report back to the court is we have to get it through at least 6 levels of attorneys, not to mention all of our internal staff and all of our policy staff, and possibly have to get it peer reviewed. So we have to allow for that much time. It doesn't mean we will consider what comes in after that. But the closer that gets to when we actually have to have it done, the less opportunity we have to incorporate it fully into our decision.
Well, thank you all for making the response, because I think it's really important that the community that's been so involved in this hear that these assurances that they will incorporate what we've done.
Okay, we got to move on. Forest Service.
I'll keep it brief. 2 announcements for the good of the group. You will see a new person at the table. I'm filling in for Dennis Yeager, our forest supervisor on the Medicine-Bow route under Boston Grasslands. He'll be an active member of the SGIT team here. I was asked to address what Brian and Game and Fish just addressed. We are moving to with the Wyoming Plan Amendment, the Y9. It's led out of Region 4. Chris Iverson, the regional forester there, is taking the lead, but we have been a good team player. We've had that communication, and we are leading our comments how our little piece of Wyoming, our ecosystems need to be represented and advocated for in that plan amendment. Same thing, we're going out with it. Probably the ROD will be published in June. So got more time on the agenda. With that, I'll keep us going.
Brian, you got it?
Sure. Just a few things from the NRCS end. We've had one sign up already this year. Our sign-ups have been moved quite a bit up with the new farm bill, but we will have a second sign up by deadline of March 20th. That includes all of our programs, including Sage Grouse Initiative. I would mention, I think if they haven't already, the service should be getting the NRCS's report for the data call. I've reviewed a draft of it. That should be coming soon. Largely, our budget is uncertain. We haven't received our state allocation for anything at this point. Astrid keeps saying any day we know that, but I guess we're kind of assuming we'll get slightly less money than we did last year, but we really don't know. I think you have probably, those that keep their ear to this, have seen a few easements closing here recently. I think we're kind of moving ahead with that, and I think we'll be actually hiring a new easement coordinator in the somewhat near future. Hopefully that'll help move that ahead even more.
So before you leave that one, just for the record, then you can pass this along. I've already talked to your chief, I've talked to Astrid. Get the backlog cleared up. Yep. This is ridiculous, and it's time to get it done, taken care of, and move on.
I'll bring that message back. Thank you. I think everybody working through it agrees. Finally,
But just more time.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing, I think you'll see an announcement fairly soon too about potentially incorporating another one of our programs, our conservation stewardship program, into the SGI model. So it's a slightly different program, a little different intent, but and I think this will be the first time the agency's tried to do that in kind of an initiative push. So I don't know a lot of details about it at this point, but I think you'll hear stuff in the coming weeks.
And a request to you, if you would you get Chief Weller and Tim Griffith's presentation they gave last week about SGI and get that to Mary so we can make that available to everybody? It is impressive how much work has gone on the ground, sage grouse related. I mean, it's overwhelming, and I think that needs to be shared with everybody.
Sure. And I would just continue to ask you guys to bring landowners forward that are interested in this type of work. I think we've largely hit our normal clientele, if you will, and so greater outreach is needed, and any help you guys can bring would be appreciated.
Great. Thank you. Other agencies, Susan, you got anything?
I got a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
The Oil and Gas Commission, we just kind of an update on the whole orphan well deal is we ended up plugging 353 orphan wells in 2014. 2015, we're going to shoot for between 400 and 500. We're going to try to utilize our contractors a little better, I guess, and try to go with 2 plug-in companies going at once to try to get a few more of the CBM wells plugged. Our first batch for 2015 are going to be about 20 deep CBM wells or north of Sinclair. That's all in sage grouse core, and I don't know if I just need to talk to Mary and Amanda about how we want to proceed with these orphan wells in core. If there's any approach we ought to use to approach the landowners with to encourage them to contact the Game and Fish on anything as far as the rehabbing of these locations to get them.
Let's have that conversation offline and include Jeremiah and I in that as well.
Because it sure hasn't been an issue with the stuff around Gillette, but we've got some black diamond wells around Buffalo that's in core, and then these Dudley wells around Seminole that are kind of a little different critter. So, but yeah, we'll
Okay.
tackle that later.
And then 2 things to add to that. I think 2 really important determinations that were made by OGCC. The first is that historically, when a well was plugged, you left the standpipe 3 feet. They're now being done 3 feet below the surface, which removes the perching source, removes that above ground piece. That's a big major change. It also adds to the cost. The second is that through the OGCC and the additional tax that the operators have agreed to put on, they have the ability to also do surface reclamation concurrent with the downhole, and that was never the interpretation. That is also huge because it moves those sites from basically being unknown as far as disturbance into a point where we can actually get them back into transition to habitat. So we really appreciate the OGCC stepping up and making some efforts above and beyond to do this in a proper manner. Lucas, thank you.
Yeah, to it, Lucas mentioned 350 for the OGCC. It's important to note that about 4 times that many were actually taken care of by industry last year. So a big kudos to them, and certainly that will continue into this next year. So it's kind of another story that's not often told about what's happening out there.
About 2,000 last year total.
1,200 is about what, but combined between OGCC and sort of private operators, we're just about 1,600. We're going to put out a press release on this, so I'll have the figures.
Yeah, it's sure important because the Anadarkos and the world and Williams and all them are sure been plugging away pretty consistently, and they don't get recognized for their work, I don't think.
We should measure that in habitat at some point when we're doing the reporting on that.
Okay.
Quick announcement, Bob, Game and Fish just recently completed our 2013 Safe Grouse Job Completion Report. Covers the period from June 2013 to May 2014. 200+ page document with a lot of good updated information that this team's looked at before in past years. So that's available through our website right now. And Mary, you want to give any update on data call, or are we good?
No, I think
Okay. Yeah, and is that available? Easily available to everybody on the team.
This is on our website.
The website, that's on the website.
I can email the link or give you the link.
Let's do that.
I'll get the link.
Just make sure it's easy for people to get to. Yep. You got anything? Okay, Joe, anything Department of Ag? Other state agencies, we got everybody covered there? Okay. All righty, let's move on. Jason?
Okay, first of all, I guess this topic was put on the agenda kind of late. I'm here to run some interference and do some clarification on a working document that the Thunder Basin Grassland Douglas District has taken some initiative on. So what I'm specifically referencing is it's a scorecard for offsite mitigation. Little past background, again, we took some initiative. I'll go into the purpose and need a little later, but it's a good working tool. We presented that to the PALS team, the Petroleum Association, and the BLM, and just kind of give a little update on what we were doing. Sounds like since then that document's been shared, which is fine, but there's been some possible questions on it, I guess, that it was worth putting on the agenda to clarify. So again, mitigation, it's not new. It's been required under our NIFMA for a while. We've been doing offsite mitigation for some time under our management, our planning rules on the grassland there. Pretty much the way we've been running things in the past, it was a case-by-case, project-by-project, decision-by-decision type mitigation. So we were going through, we were making the assessment, we were having to evaluate different types of habitat and what the associated mitigation or need would be based on the disturbance of that habitat. Again, credit to the staff. We recognize that there was possibly a way to do this that was more efficient, a little easier to administer, was transparent. I'm sure a lot of the people that were doing the offsite mitigation wanted to know how they were assessed. They wanted us to be consistent. They wanted something that they could understand. So again, that tool pretty much came out as a way to show where the numbers came from, show some of our values that are straight out of our management plan, how we came up with the assessment in terms of acreages, and then how those would be quantified into a working amount to restore or do that offsite mitigation. Some of the other questions we've been asked, again, I will stress, it's an internal working document. We like to call it a tool. It's just a tool for implementing a process that's been in place for some time. I've also been asked if it's any way associated with some of the plan amendment work, the Y9 stuff we're doing. No, it's not. Again, it's just the mitigation process is what we're doing through there. Really wanted to stress the standardization. It reviews proposals. It makes the determination even if mitigation is needed. It directly talks about a lot of our different habitat types. It's based on science. I could, as a line officer, stand here and pass the red-face test. Did I treat this grazer with the same consistency, transparency, and fairness that I did, my oil company? It was derived entirely within us. And just again, from an implementation, you guys know the amount of projects going out, the number of EISs and development that's proposed. It was just from an administration implementation standpoint, a really good thing to do. Another thing that validated the need is, as wind of this efforts kind of made its rounds through industry or cooperating agencies, we've got a lot of feedback that yes, it is needed. We've learned that University of Wyoming is actually taking on a similar effort, so we were able to contact them and work and talk about, that purpose and need and how we're coming out with implementing that. So again, I just wanted to take a couple minutes to give you some of that background, clarify. I won't go into the details of how that scorecard, is derived. I do have copies. Again, we're not hiding anything. We're very transparent on where those numbers came from. If you want a copy, I do have that available upon request. Again, we're not specifically, it's a dynamic process. It's not like a decision. We are happy to share, but we're going to try our process before it's open to a lot of discussion or different things there. So really, I think the value was to get some dialogue. Did I miss, did I address, again, a lot of those inquiries that we've been getting and people's concerns associated with the rumblings of that scorecard?
Well, there are a couple things I'll share with you that I think are important.
Okay.
The first one is that mitigation as a whole has to be addressed and should be addressed in a broad sense. If we end up with Forest Service having a mitigation policy that doesn't connect with BLM's mitigation policy, that doesn't connect with DEQ's mitigation policy, we've got a mess. And clearly, you can't do that if you're doing this all internal. The whole point of the Sage Grouse team is that we have an inclusive process where people can come in, interact, and participate. And I would encourage you to do that with this. It's very difficult. As you know, within an agency to come up with your final draft and then get the authors to back off and say, well, maybe we weren't as inclusive as we should be. So that caution certainly. The
No.
second is that we really have got, there are too many mitigation efforts out there that are at cross purposes. And if we don't have a uniform approach to this, we're going to have a problem. Now, it's not as critical as it is in some other areas where mitigation is the main part of their strategy. That in ours, it's the third leg of ours. It's avoid, minimize, and then mitigate.
Right.
But I just caution on both of those that if we develop these all in a vacuum, we're going to have a real mess on our hands. So,
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I validate that need. Some of that same need, I think, is what did. We do acknowledge it is a dynamic process. A lot of these will go into that there. I think this is a step in the positive direction, as, again, you definitely hit on the head that we need to be consistent across agency boundaries and have some sort of direction, and there already are quite a few executive team working boards that are going through like efforts to their inputs there. So definitely validate that concern. It's a concern we have, and yeah, as we remain dynamic, as we continue to work with some of those groups, hopefully we address that and get focused on what the most appropriate and effective way to do that would be.
Esther, comments from PAW, you guys sat in on this at one point. Tom?
Yeah, I would just say I'm just concerned for it being applied in non-core areas. The intent of the SGIT is to try to incentivize development in non-core. Just caution, be careful for that.
Correct.
Disincentive.
Yeah, and to go through that, you understand the NIFMA regulations we're under and how we manage. We do manage for species viability with and without the core. So at our level, we've been doing it. Again, it's not a new process, and I understand what you're saying, but this isn't a direct response to, I guess, some of your concerns. That's pretty much policy stuff, that goes into that. This is just, I can't change that. This is just mitigation that we're already doing outside of core and inside of core. This is a tool to help me do that more efficiently. As far as if it's needed with and without this document, really, that's a above and beyond, I guess, concern, but I will definitely pass that forward. And I hear you. I emphasize your concerns there. So
Yeah, I would be just like you said about consistency. There's a lot of offsite mitigation policies being developed. It's getting very difficult to sort them all out and follow one another and how we can be applied in the future.
Yeah, and I think the Thunder is probably the classic example where we could do this wrong. You've got a mixed land ownership pattern. The whole point and the consistency that I'll argue for is what is best for the birds. Now, that may mean that the mitigation for an action on federal lands really should take place on private. And that path has been cleared, starting with BLM. It may be that action on private is best mitigated on federal. It may be that Susan has the opportunity to do mitigation on state. And if we do this in silos, we're going to do little penny ante crap jobs out there and do nothing for the bird. So that to me is the other important part. But I agree with Tom. If we start having a broad mitigation, then how do we end up focusing on core? So,
right. And again, to me, I do address that. So we have been doing that mitigation. It has been, as you reference, all over the board, even internally. I think we'll say that. So we're trying to take that initiative to go where you guys are wanting to go there. Again, I see this. I understand the concerns. I know this is dynamic, but to me, I'm seeing progress because before we were just, there wasn't even a tool out there. It was a case-by-case basis, decision by decision. So we're moving the right direction. Good concerns, good groups like this will help us get there. So.
Okay, other thoughts? Lynn, go ahead.
I guess I've got a question. You mentioned this is a tool to help in the efficiency process, not unlike decisions you've made in the past. So I guess my question is have you gone through a similar process on a specific project basis?
Yeah,
Come up
we've
with
used
the
this.
same outcome,
Right.
including the cost analysis and
Addressing the cost analysis stuff, again, where I like it personally because it is transparent and consistent. So we did use unique numbers. If you do get a copy and have interest, it's pretty clear in there where these numbers came by. And they're based on a lot of historic treatments or habitat treatments that are specific to our end of the state. So it's not a blanket, hey, New York uses 95,000 an acre. We have good information, good data that we could stand behind. And again, part of our intent is to be fair there. So on that, that's one of the intents of the tool.
so has the process gone, you've worked through the process where you've actually done it, allowed the disturbance, and implemented the mitigation on the ground?
I don't have a ton of examples. It evolved through different, we have done offsite mitigation in the past that had components of this. We've incorporated those components into trying to get, our first draft, our first run of this thing here. In terms of how this works other places, my background's really in engineering. I kind of compare what the Corps does for wetland mitigation. They've got a similar system for implementation, how they came up with the need for mitigation, restoration, and this is where it came from. So you were looking for similar analogies or agencies using something like that. My experience is the Corps does a lot of that.
Well, I guess I was more looking for examples of where it's actually been a success. And then by utilizing this tool, it makes it more efficient.
Okay. You're looking for examples of offsite mitigation that we've done in the past?
One of my concerns is assigning a dollar amount, and then if I understand correctly, is that paid to the Forest Service to actually implement the mitigation effort?
Depending on the way it's set up, and forgive me, I'm going to defer to one of my wildlife biologists. It's not an excuse. I've been on forest for about 3 weeks now, so can either of you address that, either Tim or Wendy?
The scorecard has yet, we're still in the testing part of it, so we have yet to take the scorecard and actually apply that to the project. So we're still in the developmental side of it.
So the answer to his question is no.
Pardon me?
Then the answer to his question is no.
No, correct, exactly.
Okay. Susan, or Mary, I don't care.
No, go ahead.
You guys fight over it.
So-
Susan wins.
Yeah, go ahead. So Jason, one of the questions is that when we were talking through and adding the additional, we kind of went through the viability thing and really understood the viability. And one of the things that I think the understanding was is that with the addition of those extra areas that would be considered core-esque or core-like or considered to be part and core, that the viability had been met, and that there didn't need to be additional offsite mitigation and non-core following on Tom's question. So do you feel that that NIFMA bar has not been reached because of the additional areas and you need to do this additionally?
Again, so core is kind of, I understand where core came from, the executive order. Of course, our management plan came out pre-core in a lot of these efforts here. I don't have the specific answer, and again, I'll ask some of my technical specialists here. It's not as cut and dry as core, non-core, within our plan right now. We are trying to manage habitat types based on a need to maintain viability, I guess. I know that's the canned answer. I just go back to our plan, but that's.
But the RMP 9 does kind of identify and analyze core and non-core and those characteristics.
Correct.
Management actions to
Correct.
Create a viability analysis.
It does address, yes, habitat that would promote that viability in that proposed amendment, correct?
I think what Mary's getting at, there's a little mission creep here.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim, you'll remember we met 2-3 years ago, sat down with the Forest Service, went through the viability process and said, okay, you've got 6 areas in the Thunder Basin, I think is what 5 would we end up with, 5, that you feel are important to meet your viability analysis standard. We're going to go along with you managing some of those as core, some of which may end up being core when we do our reanalysis. Some of which are not going to. The one at Upton is not going to be core. It just doesn't fit the description.
So all of a sudden now, are we getting outside of what that agreement was and outside of that uniform management approach? That's the concern I hear from Tom, from Lyndon, and from others, is that all of a sudden now it's all wide open. And I think we need to make sure that we're not having a big mission creep here that dilutes the effort that's been made by the state of Wyoming. So that's just a caution, I think, back to you guys. And Tim does have the history. I understand that you weren't there for that. It's unfair to pin you down on it. But bear in mind, there is a history here, and it was a very, very detailed, biologically based history that got us where we are. So, Susan, you had some.
Well, I'm concerned about the consistency, just like everyone else. And if you're going to use, and I realize you haven't used it yet, but if you're going to use this to make determinations, but it's an internal tool, how will that work when you're working like with adjacent state lands? I mean, even if you're working on habitat types, we're right next door, and your management action based on the use of this tool will affect and impact management on our lands.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, I'll use my newness to the group to kind of do this. So we've been doing offsite mitigation for a while. I assume BLM has, I'm sure other people have. This is our attempt. I hear you guys, and it's some of the same concerns that are driving our purpose and need to come up with something, you know? Mm-hmm. What have others been doing? I mean, we've done it. It's not a new process. We've always done it. It's just something to help us do it, to help us get to the answers that you're trying to drive to. So I guess, you know, to me, where again, I keep stressing its process is, wouldn't you guys rather have this that's got good background that we could share with you, that you know where you're being assessed, rather than the way we've been doing it in the past, where we're reinventing the wheel on every decision or disturbance? I'm just trying to get dialogue, I guess. You know, again, we know we don't have the answer. We know it's going to be dynamic. We've got the same objectives and intent. So, yeah, we welcome it.
With that, then I think we've got to move on. But if what you want is dialogue, you can't have that if you don't include the other people who are involved.
Right.
And if there's a commitment from you to do that, then we can move on. But we need to know there's a commitment there for people to know about it, to have input into it. And Tim, my hat's off to you. You've always been good about doing that. This came out of the blue, and everybody kind of went, "What the heck?" So, is that something you can agree to?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to use the tool, and again, I think the thing we're afraid of.
No.
You're asking me if we agree to the dialogue? Yeah, I think that's why we're open to entertain it. That's why I think we're open to present right now and get conversation to start that dialogue and figure out what would be the most efficient way to collect that and how to move forward.
All right. Well, let's when we get done, let's have a conversation about how to do that most effectively and within the parameters that you have to follow. We understand.
So people have been asking me already about a copy of this, and you kind of said you didn't want me to distribute it. So
part of the, again,
you got to
know,
deal with that.
We are trying to be transparent. We're trying to be good team players. And again, I called it interference control. I think this is great because we get to have that dialogue. We get to talk. We get to sit down. I just do not want it to be misconstrued as new stuff, new strategy, new direction, new assessment. And based on some of that stuff, I have no problem. I've brought hard copies for whoever's interested. Again, it's not top secret stuff. It's actually very transparent. It's very simplified. So I'm happy to share that with anyone that would like a copy.
Can I just make a comment that I guess, you know, representing the mining industry, where I learned about this was at a mining industry meeting. And the sense that I got that it was new.
Policy or strategy?
Because this whole
right. You guys should not, it shouldn't be news to anyone. The offsite mitigation or mitigation's been happening, correct? That's a true statement. Everyone's aware that we've been doing that. Okay, so that's something. Okay.
So there may be, but we certainly aren't aware of it.
No, that's good to know. I mean, I wasn't asking that facetiously. It sounds like there is some need for communication and dialogue. So again, this had value. It's progress. It's a right step.
Again, thank you for being here.
Eric.
Sorry.
Stand up so people can hear you, please.
It's important to note that the Forest Service has a legal requirement to maintain viable populations of sage grouse throughout the planting area, throughout the Thunder Basin National Grassland. They have to maintain viable populations in the core areas. They have to maintain viable populations throughout the core areas. If the SGIT wants to agree that the SGIT only wants to worry about viable populations in the core areas and they don't want to maintain viable populations outside the core areas, that does not diminish the Forest Service's federal responsibility to do their job to maintain viable populations outside the core areas as well. And in cases where you have interfingered public and private lands, if the private landowners or the state landowners are not maintaining viable populations and are crippling the federal government's ability to maintain those viable populations, it may actually cause that bar to raise on the federal lands because the federal government may have a more stringent bar that it must meet in order to maintain viability.
We understand that. I think the issue here is transparency, real transparency and participation. So, Eric, you feel sufficiently flogged at this point?
My boss owes me 3 weeks into the job, you know.
He took it last week and he chickened out and didn't come and send you, so we'll give him a second round.
You let him know how hard, yeah.
I think it's pretty clear how the group feels.
Now, we expected that.
We want to work with you.
Yep.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Gary, you got your Teflon suit on?
Can you grab the?
I see.
Yes.
I guess it goes by Mary, I think.
And I understand some of the history. Yeah, there is a few because I think what we don't address they
This is fine. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. I have a soft voice, so I'll use the microphone here. So first of all, thanks, Bob, for inviting us today. So my name is Gary Miller. I'm with the Anschutz Corporation, the Vice President of Power Company Wyoming. And what we're going to do today is provide the group with an update on where we are in the project development for Chip Cherry Madre Wind Energy Project. We also want to talk about our sage-grouse research efforts that have been ongoing now for 5 years. So I'll give a brief, hopefully brief background on the project and who we are and kind of where we are and talk about our conservation measures. And then John Kmeyer, who's the principal ecologist with SWCA Environmental, will talk about our sage-grouse research and what we've been doing on that, and then I'll come back and wrap things up. Oops. Working. All right, thanks. So we're part of the Anschutz Corporation. It's a privately owned corporation headquartered in Denver, Colorado, with a variety of different business units, including the entertainment, where we have AEG Live, which is a concert promotion company. Oops, I get this down. We also have a company, Xanterra, that manages national parks and recreation and ecotourism. Broadmoor is one of our newer acquisitions into the family. We purchased Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs a few years ago. Ranching has long been a part of the Anschutz Corporation family. We have 3 ranches, one in Texas, one in Colorado, another in Wyoming. That's really the Wyoming Ranch, located just south of Rollins, the Overland Trail Cattle Company, that we're developing our wind project on, and will be the subject of our discussion this morning. Oil and gas, we've been big in the industry for over 75 years now. Probably our biggest discovery was the Anschutz Ranch East Field out of the Overtrust Belt. We were also one of the early players in the Bakken field. Today we have interest still in Pinedale and in the Powder River Basin. And that brings us to our renewable energy companies. So here we have 2 companies, Power Company Wyoming, which is developing the Chip Cherry Madre Wind Energy Project, and Transwest Express, which is developing a transmission line. We'll talk just very briefly about it. So Transwest Express, it's a 600 kV DC transmission line. So it's designed to take renewable energy from Wyoming and deliver it to the desert Southwest region. So the northern terminal is near Rollins, just south of Sinclair, and that line will then deliver power down into the El Dorado Valley south of Las Vegas.
We've been working on this since 2008, so about 2/3 of the project is located on federal lands managed by the BLM. In 2013, the BLM published the draft EIS for the project. In April of this year, they will be publishing the final EIS for the project, or the record of decision by September of this year. So Power Company Wyoming, I'm sorry, I back up one. So in Wyoming here for the Trans-West Express project, what you see here highlighted is the agency preferred alternative for the Trans-West Express project. So as you can see, we start to south of Sinclair, kind of head across the I-80 corridor to Homestead, we'll return south and head to Colorado. So we are sited within the core area transmission corridor created by the Sage-Grouse implementation team. So now, Choke Cherry Sierra Madre Wind Energy Project. So this project is a proposed 1,000 turbine project based upon today's technology. We're looking at 3,000 megawatts of installed capacity. The project is located just south of Rawlins, Wyoming. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the map on the lower right-hand corner. So the blue are the highest winds in the nation. So according to the National Renewable Energy Lab, these are all Class 7 winds, which are superb. Red is also very, very high class winds, 5 and 6. This is really the best winds in the United States onshore. So here's a close-up of the project. So, and just to define a couple terms here. So Choke Cherry is our northern development area. Sierra Madre is our southern development area. It is all one project. It is being developed in 2 phases. So phase 1 is Western Choke Cherry and Western Sierra Madre. So you'll hear those terms quite a bit throughout the morning, of Choke Cherry and Sierra Madre. I'll point out one other area. My pointer works. You also hear us talk quite a bit about Miller Hill. This is the area of Miller Hill here. It's a high altitude plateau kind of located in the southwestern portion of the project. Just for scale, each one of these squares is, of course, a section. So it's about 30 miles east-west and 25 miles or so north-south. So talking about permitting and development. So all along, we've always used the best available science to permit this. And to study the potential impacts of our project. It has gone through an EIS by the BLM. And in doing this, throughout our approximately 220,000 acre project area, you know, we've looked at everything out there. I mean, we say that we've left no stone unturned, and that's almost literally true at this point. So we've been at this for quite a while. I'll note 2 days from now, January 30th of 2008, was the date we filed our initial right-of-way application for development of the project. So we've been at this for 7 years now. Key permitting achievements. So the BLM in 2012 did finish the EIS for the project. It was development level EIS and issued a record of decision. It does involve tiered NEPA, National Environmental Policy Analysis, off of that final EIS. In 2012, we obtained our Carbon County conditional use permit, and Wyoming Industrial Siting Council approved the project in 2014. And the record of this, or excuse me, decision record for EA1 was signed in December of last year. So that decision record involves infrastructure components for the project. This would be rail facility, quarry, and haul road. In progress, so we still have EA2, which is the site-specific plan and development for the wind turbines. And people also ask, oftentimes when we do these presentations now, about EGLE permits. So we have applied for the EGLE permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we began those conversations with them in 2010. So all along we've worked with them on how to site the project to meet the criteria for an EGLE permit. And so we've done radar surveys, long watch after count surveys, point count surveys, and a variety of other surveys. I'll point out here, this is a list of the surveys we've done for the project. And the one thing to note is we have over 5,000 hours now of EGLE and avian use surveys throughout the entire project area. You know, the service, and looking at our data, has commented this is the most comprehensive, complete, and robust data set they've ever reviewed in relation to an illegal take permit. So turning next, we'll talk about conservation measures for sage grouse. So first off, we have implemented a number of conservation measures across the ranch. We're probably unique in that we own the 320,000 acre ranch in which we propose to develop the project. It is within the checkerboard, so it's about half BLM, half private ownership, which is why we're going through the EIS process with the BLM on the project. So a few years ago, we looked at initiating conservation measures for sage grouse on the ranch. And one of the first things we did is identify the high-risk fencing for the ranch. So high-risk fencing we define as fences within 0.6 of a mile of a lek or areas where we see sage grouse movement and usage. One of the things, and we'll talk about this here, and this will be John's presentation, is we have implemented a monitoring program where we have put GPS tags on sage grouse. So we maintain about 50 females and 50 males on the project, and we measure the movements and where they go. And we have collected to date about 500,000 data points in the locations of sage grouse and their movements. So as you see, we have removed fence where we could. Where we couldn't remove fence, we marked the fence. We've also converted fence on the ranch. So places where we have a sheep fence, as you see there on the left, where we could, we've actually converted that into a BLM wildlife-friendly fence. So putting the smooth wire in the bottom and the 3 barbs at the top of that. Excuse me. One of the things you'll note, this isn't particularly great sage grouse habitat, but it's an area called some flats, which we do see sage grouse usage during the winter months. Another thing we did is we worked with the Future Farmers of America. So we provided materials, they provided labor, and they built the bird ladders to put in our stock tanks. So we did this a few years ago and installed over 30 bird ladders in all of our stock tanks throughout the ranch. This is actually an interesting project, which I'll talk about here. So we had an opportunity in 2010 where we had a wildfire come through and burn the area. So burned about 170 acres. You see the picture here kind of on the upper left-hand corner. So as a result, we decided this is a good opportunity to try various treatments on the property. So we came up with a design where we did 3 different treatments. So we applied, so we put in a native seed mixture rich in forbs that are desirable for sage grouse. We put in the native seeds along with yellow clover, or yellow alfalfa, so falcata. And then we just did an overseeding of falcata itself. And what we found was kind of interesting because as you see in July 11, the area reseeded very well with natural forbs. The falcata itself did not grow. And we think the reason is probably because of the drought that year. So we didn't have success for it. The other thing we found in doing this is through our data, we hope to see an uptick in sage grouse usage, given the rehabilitation of the area. That didn't happen, and that kind of surprised us and disappointed us. But in the end of the day, we think we can explain that. This is an area, it's a high altitude plateau. And what we see in this area is that in the summer months, it really dries out. So there's very little water. And what happens is our grouse, as we see through our GPS tags, actually leave this area. So come midsummer, so they abandon the area. They head to Miller Hill, quite literally greener pastures. Or they head east to the agricultural fields over there. So they're not present at the time this would provide habitat services to the grouse. So our takeaway from this, after spending tens of thousands of dollars in looking at this really is that to get value for your conservation dollars, you should spend your money where the grouse spend their time. Grazing management. So here too, our grazing allotments, again, we operate the grazing here. All of our grazing allotments meet the BLM rangeland health standards. So you see the before picture, that's the condition of the property when we acquired it back in the mid-90s. And the after picture is what it looks like today. So we have found through actively grazing management plan that we can actually benefit the grouse using our cows. We do a rotational grazing pattern. We make sure to leave enough forbs and grass for the sage grouse when we're through. It's lightly stocked, so it actually works very, very well. We consider it very compatible, our grazing operation with sage grouse. I know this is always controversial when you start talking about hunting. One of the things we have done is where we can, we have prohibited hunting on the ranch. It's been interesting for us because, throughout our studies, we've had 18 grouse now harvested by hunters. And the majority of those are happening south of us in an area called Jack Creek, which is blocked BLM land, and to the east of us on private lands and lands where people have, it's public lands where people have access. And what we see in our GPS data, because these are part of our control areas that John will talk about, is that this is the late brood rearing period. So it's a time of year when the females and the chicks are still grouped up together very tightly. And they're using those wet areas and the habitat adjacent to the wet areas. The males are still widely dispersed across the landscape. And the harvest numbers, the highest harvest numbers, are then coming from those grouse that are in those late brood rearing areas. And I think that has implications for hunting. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at Game and Fish's data and see whether or not you're seeing a disproportionate number of hens and chicks harvested during the hunting season. If that's true in our area, then we might have an explanation for that using our data. There's also a very real practical reason why we ban hunting, is that we've spent millions on sage grouse research and studies and conservation measures. And so when we lose a grouse and lose that tag, we're losing all the data that comes with that. These tags, excuse me, are about $4,000 a piece. So they're pretty expensive. And as you can see the tag here on the upper right, it's got the number 6 shot through the back of it. So we lost that tag. It was quite literally a money shot. So we worked all along to minimize potential impacts for the project. So we're not developing a core area. We have a conservation plan underway that we continue to work on. So when we first started looking at this back in 2009, one of the questions is addressing the sage grouse impacts and what we would do there. And we came up with the idea then of a candidate conservation agreement with assurances, which I know you're familiar with here. And so we actually prepared a CCAA and submitted it to the service. So we started in 2009 with doing a comprehensive mapping of all the vegetation and habitat within the project area. From that, we developed a habitat equivalency analysis model, so-called HEA model. And I know we don't have time to go into detail today, but it's a very, very robust model that's used to quantify habitat values. Mostly it gets involved in a lot of environmental litigation, but it is a very robust model. We were the first ones to develop it with sage grouse specifically in mind. And the service and BLM liked that model so much that they have now adapted it to other projects like the interstate transmission lines. Through that, we quantified the conservation benefit that would be achieved by implementing the conservation measures. And our conservation measures are, for the most part, the fairly standard suite. They look a lot like the Wyoming umbrella CCAA and the measures contained in there. We went ahead and filed that CCAA with the service in February of 2010. It is still pending at this time. And of course, the March 2010 is when the listing decision was made. So as we engage with the service, the question we also often got asked is, how do we measure the effectiveness of our conservation measures? How do we detect that conservation uplift that would come by implementing these measures? And so what we decided to do at this point is to engage SWCA and began a sage grouse research and monitoring program by tagging our grouse, following them around, understanding their habitat needs and usage, and then using that data to both measure the conservation uplift and to direct where our future conservation measures would be applied. So when we look at this, we start with our grouse, we apply our conservation measures, and hopefully the result's going to be many, many more grouse. Yes. So the question then, and I'll turn it over to John here, is what have we learned in the last 5 years? What have we, through our very robust sage grouse monitoring and research that we've been doing, and it is funded by our company in Wyoming. What have we learned about our grouse, their behaviors, and how we use this in our project development? And John?
Actually, we're gonna take a 10-minute break. We've got to do some technical switches and stuff and let everybody get a chance to stretch their legs. So we'll take a 10-minute break and then John will come back with his part.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
You're the man, you're Clay Showman. Wow. Oh, you did, okay. That's what he said, he called the other day. I talked to you last week or not about your well plugins and your MIUs and all that stuff. I don't know if it was you that called or somebody else, but that was who You better stop there. I know nothing about downfall. I just all the surface stuff on all that.
Say we're not the thing about Sweetwater, it's such a small spot that you don't want to give it up. Right now, it's not getting hard to produce. So I understand that we've got a few ideas on the board. DJ, we'll have some results. So that's just interesting. It's rather than just say, if there's something to work, that's all I have.
It's funny when you sent that out because that morning I finalized the draft and published our Q&A list and started to analyze. And we get this, 3 hours later, we get this title. Well, this yeah, okay. Well, it's a know that we're working on with most of our local people. Yeah, but any course. I don't want to say I tried. That's understandable. Understand You're one that you guys are one but surviving as a $1.90 or whatever, I from that kind of thing part around, but they may have a not budgeting. Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Brian is called so, really this, when I send in, my 24 hours notice, are you calling Joe? I will be. Okay. I guess I'll ask you. That's good. I used to have her job and then I got promoted to Idle Wells. So, I did that job. Short, I can always tell her, I guess I can still do like 24 hours. Yeah, what first what we frowned on you only get 5. So be it. So next week's problem. That makes things easier. Yeah, you're welcome.
We'll see the district break. I know, I got the map. All right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, probably have.
Oh, nice meeting you. Yeah, I've heard a lot about you. Oh, yeah. How are you? Good, thanks. Thanks for always helping.
See how this goes.
You want it earlier? I want to do it again. I want to do it. Yeah, I think you can. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, let's.
Okay.
Bob, you guys are in the way. We'll sit down.
Is the gentleman from Tri Hydro here that's going to do the water development? He said he was going to be here at 10:30. Does anybody know Jason Mead? If you see him? Oh, crap. Okay.
All right, you ready, John? I'm ready. Okay, it's all yours.
Is this, can you hear me? All right, okay. Is the feedback better, Mary?
Yes, better.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
All right. So Gary gave a really good overview of the project, and I'm going to kind of walk through some of the research efforts that we've completed over the past 5 years for Sage Grouse. And before I take credit for everybody else's work, I want to recognize our partners, a really good research team. Josh Millspot and Chris Hansen out of University of Missouri. Scott Gamo, who's in the room here, is our partner at Plumbing Game and Fish Department. We've got Mark Rumble out of the Rocky Mountain Research Station in Rapid City. And then, of course, SWCA, Nate Wojcik, a colleague of mine, is sitting in the back of the room. He'll be passing out some sage grouse tags for everybody to look at, just so you're familiar with the technology. So the study design we're using, it's a really unique opportunity that we have to implement a before-after control impact study. Basically, this allows us to measure or characterize what the grouse are doing now and compare that use to the response they have to the wind energy development project. This will really be, it will be the only before-after control impact study ever done for wind energy impacts on greater sage grouse. And really, it's one of the few true Baki designs that have been implemented for energy development impacts. And the things we're looking at, basically right now we're in the pre-construction portion of this. We're trying to characterize the pre-construction ecology, behavior, habitat use of these birds. And then in the future, as the project is built and in operation, we'll evaluate how the birds respond to that. So we'll look at how their space use changes, how they use the landscape, their home range size, changes in their demographics. So are there changes in their nesting behaviors, their nest success rates, their survival? All of those are important factors that we'll consider as we evaluate how the project impacts the population. The other added benefit, I think, and this to me is equally important to the effects of the wind energy project, is our ability to evaluate the effectiveness of various conservation measures. Gary talked a lot about a lot of the conservation measures that Power Company of Wyoming and Overland Trail Cattle Company have already implemented across the ranch. And we're using this data, we will be able to hopefully measure our response to those conservation efforts and identify, like Gary said, identify other areas where additional conservation measures can take place. So just to give you a quick orientation of where we're at on the landscape, the leks we're looking at, our populations. This generally is the project area. We've got the I-80 corridor, Rollins, Sinclair to the north, the Saratoga Valley here to the east, the North Platte River runs right here through the Overland Trail Ranch. This area to the north is the Chokecherry Wind Development Area. To the south, we have the Sierra Madre Wind Development Area. And then you can see this light blue color. It might not show up really well on the screen in the back, but these are the core area boundaries. The circles are leks. The size and the number next to the leks is the 2011 to 2013 average peak male attendance for those leks. So the larger the circle, the more males we see at those lefts. There are 5 different study areas that we're looking at in our study design. 2 control areas, one here east of the North Platte, another along Jack Creek, for those of you who are familiar with that area of the state. We've got a treatment area here in the Choke Cherry development area, another treatment in the Sierra Madre development site, and then we call this area down here a gradient control. There's not going to be any direct impacts or direct impacts of any kind from the wind development area, but it is in close proximity to some of the activities. So we'll look at potentially some indirect effects, see if those birds do respond to the wind activities, wind development activities in any way. Gary already kind of touched a little bit on this. This is one of our tag birds. You can see I'm going to pass out a couple of tags, and then Nate has another one. We use GPS PTTs, platform terminal transmitters. These give us, you can see it on her back here, this is a UHF antenna coming out of the back of it. It's got a photovoltaic cell on the back that allows it to, the battery to recharge. We have deployed these over the past 5 years on 357 different sage grouse, resulting in more than 500,000 points, data points of their locations and their behaviors. And as of April 2015, we'll have 5 years of pre-construction data, so a very robust data set. I would guess this is probably the most robust pre-construction data set ever collected for greater sage grouse. It's just an amazing amount of information and allows us to really evaluate how these birds are going to respond to the wind energy development. So I'm going to start one of the tags here. These tags are pretty amazing. I know you've seen one of these, Pat. Started here.
I wear one.
Yeah. We track your movements, so I know where you're at all times. The tags are pretty amazing. We can program them seasonally to answer different research questions. A good example of that is for our male birds during the lekking season. We take a point every hour from about 4 in the morning to 10 in the morning to look at lek dynamics, transition between leks, the probability that that male is going to attend a lek on any given morning. So we do have a lot of flexibility with our tags to answer our various research questions. So right now, what I'm talking about today, the before-after controlled impact, I'm talking about the before portion, the pre-construction portion. I'm going to walk through kind of what we know about the habitat of the project site, what we know about the demographics, and then I'm going to end with space use. The space use component of this research design is important because it's going to allow us to evaluate how the bird's behavior, or if the bird's behavior changes, and if it does, how it changes. Whether they are completely displaced, whether their home range stays in the exact same place, or whether that home range is just modified in some way, stretched or enlarged in some way, or they shift maybe some of their activity areas in different seasons. So with us, I mean, to understand what the birds are doing, to us it all starts with the habitat. We have to have a good understanding of what the habitat is. And we've done an amazing amount of work understanding this. We have 2,200 vegetation transects that we've collected over the past 5 years. To put that in perspective, over 350,000 acres, that would be the equivalent of 1 vegetation transect per quarter section. So we've got an amazing amount of information to help us understand resource selection by the birds, habitat patterns, patterns of use. And this kind of psychedelic map I have here is actually a detailed vegetation map. Gary mentioned Miller Hill. This is the rim of Miller Hill. This is the Miller Hill Road, so the public road that goes to the top of Miller Hill. You can see some agricultural development here. We've got aspen along the edges of Miller Hill. And you can see the detail. This is a 4-meter resolution map, so it's very detailed, very fine scale. At this scale, you know, it's useful for something, but really understanding patterns of use, if I can get this to change. We've actually combined the vegetation classes into something a little more meaningful for management. This brown color here is sagebrush. You can see the green areas, and it's actually a little bit more visible maybe on the television screen over there. The green and yellow areas associated with the aspen and mixed mountain shrub and the different habitat types. And it's really useful because understanding this vegetation and the habitat allows us to understand how the birds use the landscape. We've taken this along with characterization of the physical and chemical properties of the soil, and we've developed ecological sites for a lot of the project site. About half of the Overland Trail Ranch, we now have ecological sites attributed to it. This is a project-specific ecological sites. They're separate from those the NRCS develops. We developed this specifically for the project. And understanding the ecological sites, the vegetation, and then overlaying our grouse use. This is actual grouse use that we have. The red, easier to see here, the red kernels here indicate higher use. And you can see this is late brooding. The birds are focused on these wet mesic irrigated agricultural fields. The wet high elevation mesic habitats are not wetlands, they're just kind of snow catches that the birds are keying in on. They provide a lot of forage, a lot of broadleaf forbs, a lot of insects that the birds seem to be keying in on at different seasons. So having this amount of information on habitat allows us to have a better understanding of why and how the birds are using the landscape. That in turn allows us to look at demographics and maybe understand patterns in the demographics of the population. Part of our study obviously is to understand how the bird is characterizing the bird's behaviors, their demographics now. We've been looking at survival the past 5 years. We've found, like others, that the highest survival at times is in early brood rearing, late autumn, and winter periods. That's on a daily and weekly basis. We took it a step further and looked at the duration of season and found that while winter, the birds do have a very high probability of surviving from day to day because the duration of that season is one of the lowest survival periods for this population in particular. We also found that annual survival, as you'd expect, is annual. It's dependent upon the year. I'm going to kind of walk through that. You can see here, the blue is hen survival over the past 5 years. The red is male survival. You can see it's variable. We started out with kind of lower survival patterns in the 20 to 30%. That's progressed to 2014. We had 62% survival this year. And when we fit a line to that, we've had about an 8% increase in hen survival over the past 5 years on a per annual basis, so an average of 8% increase. Whereas the male population has stayed relatively stable. We've got a stable male population, but we do like to see this this line increasing. That's obviously good news to us. I think it matches some of the patterns that I think Tom has talked about, some of the predator prey dynamics potentially that we're seeing out there. So this is something that we're going to continue to watch in both our control and treatment areas to see how the population continues to behave. Within the project side, I showed you the imagery or the map of the leks. We're counting 58 different leks. Lek attendance generally has matched what we've seen statewide. It's decreased through about 2012, 2013. And then on the project site in city areas, we started to see an uptick in some areas 2012, other areas 2013 to 2014. And I'll kind of walk you through that for both our controls and our treatments. This top line is the Wyoming core area lek. This is the average 3-year average peak male attendance that we calculated from the data available from Game and Fish. Core areas and non-core areas, as you'd expect, you have lower attendance in non-core than in core. Our treatment area, which are all located in core areas, match that core area kind of 3-year average range. They're right in line with what you'd expect. So our areas do match the remainder of core in the state. And you can see this trend. You did have the decrease until you got to 2013, started to flatten out, and in 2014 we saw an increase. Our lek attendance values increased. We saw more males and more hens on the leks. The same was true, and now I can't get it to work. The same was true of our treatment areas. You can see our treatment areas both in non-core, match that non-core lek trend and kind of the magnitude of the leks in non-core areas. And you see the same pattern, although in these two, you kind of see that they decreased 2010 to 2011, and then there's a stabilization from 2011 to 2014. So there's a slight difference in the way our leks are behaving. It could just be we don't have as many birds in these areas, so we're not able to detect the same trends. But it's something that we'll continue to monitor. It could also be a lot of these this area is where we're implementing conservation measures. So maybe we're already measuring or detecting a change as a result of some of the conservation measures that Power Company of Wyoming and Overland Trail Ranch have implemented. Another great aspect of this is it's resulted in 2 people obtaining their masters with Josh Millspaw, Alicia Frimgen, who studied lek dynamics, and then Leslie Schreiber, who's actually a biologist here in Wyoming, I think now for Wyoming Game and Fish. Both completed their master's theses on the project site. Alicia looked at lek dynamics in males and found a lot of similar things to what other researchers have found. Weather influences lek attendance, both wind and precipitation. Some kind of novel things that she found. She actually found that 40% of the males in the population transition to another lek at least once per year. So we do see a fairly high probability of transitioning to other leks. She also found that on the leks, she was only able, if a male was on the lek, she was only able to detect that male if it was present 87% of the time. So she had a detection probability of 87%, which, you know, could mean that through further study, we could develop some sort of correction index to get a better idea of what the true population size is. She's continuing to look at this, as well as look at some of our hen lek dynamics, how the hens use the leks. That's part of her ongoing efforts. She's working with us to do that as well. There we go. So probability of attendance, I talked about this. I'm just going to walk you through her findings. We've got hourly probability of attendance on the y-axis, precipitation the previous day on the x, and you can see that decrease in probability as precipitation increased. No real surprise there. The wind speed was interesting to me. You have the same probability of attendance on the y-axis. The x-axis is average probability of the previous 8 days on this one. And she found that in addition to the day of the count, there was actually a lag effect of the wind. So if you had very strong winds the week or 10 days prior to it, affected the males' probability of attending the lek on the day after those winds ceased. And I think those are important things to consider as we, you know, count leks, considering what the preceding conditions were, making sure that we're aware of what's happened on the day of the count, but also what's happening immediately prior to that count, because it does influence our ability to see those males. Again, transitional movements between leks. One interesting thing that probably the most interesting thing to me was, again, the daily probability of moving or transitioning to a new lek on the y, and then the mass of a male on the x-axis. You can see that the low mass, low fitness males, a lot of the juvenile males as well, transition more frequently than the high mass, high fitness males. The most interesting thing was that was correlated with survival. So the males, the dominant males staying on the lek have a higher survival probability than those that are bouncing around, moving around the leks. In addition, I mentioned male lek attendance. We also looked at lekking and nesting demographics of hens. Understanding how the hens use the landscape, use the leks is important in our consideration of designing a project for Power Company of Wyoming, but also understanding how the birds respond in the future. We found a very high proportion of our population nests, and some years it's as much as 100% of our tagged hens actually initiate a nest. And we see a lot of the same patterns in terms of nest selection and success. It's really influenced by vegetation and cover, and it varies by the experience of the hen. Adult hens are going to be more successful than juvenile hens. We also found in our population, the 2-mile buffer around the leks really protects the vast majority of our nesting hens. About 85% of our nesting hens nest within 2 miles of the lek. And so in our population, that 2-mile buffer really is adequate to protect the majority of our birds. And this illustrates that fact. When you look at it on the basis of a hen's movement from the lek she visited just prior to nesting, with 50% of nests within 1.25 miles, 65 within 2 miles. So that 65 number is important because I'm going to come back to that. 76% nested within 3 miles of the lek that she last attended, and 90% nested within 4 miles. So these values are not that dissimilar from what other researchers have presented. In our study area, we actually looked at the proportion of nests that occurred not within 2 miles of the lek that she last visited, but any lek that's out there with a 2-mile buffer would be applied. and found that 90% or 82% of the nests were within 2 miles of that lek location. So like I said, the vast majority of our birds are actually nesting within 2 miles of active leks.
John, before you leave that, did you ever run a nest success relative to distance?
We haven't, but I'm actually going to talk about nest success and what we found influences it. And we didn't really ever evaluate distance from, but that is something we can look at.
I think that would be interesting to know, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, knowing whether it's if birds are expending more energy coming to and from their nest site to the lek.
Is there a higher vulnerability as they get further away? Are they safer if they're close? Are they safer if they're far away? I think that's something we all probably ought to know.
Right, I suspect, and I have a slide here in a moment that I'll show that actually shows that they can be too close, I think.
Yeah.
And we have data that actually does support that. But the distance away, 2 versus 4 versus 3 miles, that's a really good comment and something we probably should take a look at. Nest site selection, this is the master species that Leslie finished in 2014. She found lateral visual obstruction, or the amount of vegetation between 9 and 18 inches, was really the only significant covariate in our model. But she did find that sage cover, density, and bunchgrass cover were influential in model selection. They weren't significant covariates, but they were influential in a number of the top models that she looked at. Interestingly, she found that rhizomatous grass was mostly negatively correlated. This is all, I don't think this is anything new. This is all kind of confirming that we're seeing the same trends that other researchers are seeing. Nest survival and productivity, this gets to Bob's question. Just like with lek attendance and nest initiation, we find that nest survival is influenced by weather and cover. Within our study area, we have an average clutch size ranging from 5 to 6.4, depending on the year. We see that nest productivity per nesting hen is 1.5 to 2.8 hatched chicks. And we found really across the entire study area, about 750,000 acres, that the only significant predictors of nest survival were hen age, and I believe the other one was, do you remember, Nate? I think I get to this. This is an example of, it was hen age and year, I'm sorry. So year kind of combines all those weather factors into a single covariate. This is an example of our nest success. And we saw some interesting success trends in our initial nest versus our second nest. Our re-nesting attempts were much more successful than our initial nesting attempts, and we have some data that suggests why this might be occurring. We also found that weather in 2012, 2013, we had 0 success of our second nest. That's not because they weren't successful, that's because they didn't even try. The conditions were so poor that the birds didn't even attempt re-nest. But when they do attempt the re-nests, after their first nest fail, we do see a very high nest success relative to the average nest success of all nests. And this, again, illustrates that difference between adults and hens. We see the adults usually have about a 20% higher probability of nest survival than the juveniles. It's just a learned behavior. They know where to nest, what's successful. And this is consistent with what others have seen. One thing that we noticed, though, that was interesting to us is our nest survival, if you look, 30.6 on average across the 5 years, is lower than what others have seen immediately adjacent to our study. Chris Carroll in Atlantic Rim found 43%, and Chad Babovo found 48 to 64 at 7 Mile Hill. These projects are just almost immediately adjacent to our project site. And we're trying to figure out why this could be happening. It could be, just our project site was different. We think it's actually attributed to the technology we're using. And this illustrates that. We see that with our GPS tags, we're able to detect exactly when the hen initiates her nest, when she starts incubating, and when she leaves that nest. And through that data, we found that 23, so almost a quarter of the nests fail in the first 3 days, and 54 fail in the first 7 days. Chad and Chris use traditional VHF telemetry methods, and oftentimes may be missing, especially these first few days, and that could be resulting in our differences. It's not to say that their values are wrong. I don't want to say that. It's just when comparing our results to the results of others, you have to be careful because the technology is different. And really what we should be caring about is not so much whether this is different from this. It's, is this different after the Link project is constructed and operating? That's really what we're interested in. And this is an example. This kind of breaks up the presentation here, and it's kind of some eye candy with our GPS tags. This is an example of this bird establishing her nest, and how we know when she nests, her behaviors during lekking, and then when she leaves the nest with her brood. And you can see this, the square dot here is Upper Iron Springs Lek. It's on the Chokecherry treatment site, and then her eventual nest location is the green dot to the south. The distance between the 2 points is about 600 meters. You can see prior to, these are about 3-day snapshots. You can see she visits the Lek location a number of times, and the rest of the time she's kind of moving across the landscape. She kind of continues that behavior, although you can see she starts to visit her nest, you know, in the next 3-day snapshot. But she continues that for the next few weeks, continuing to visit the Lek and nest. And then finally, you can see she seems to have selected her nest site. She's starting to roost just off her nest site, potentially go in and lay, and then go back to her roost location. She does that for another about a week. And then finally, she starts to incubate. So we know the day she starts to incubate, and the day that that nest is started. So we can measure exactly where that nest is. We can send somebody in 7 to 10 days after, let her really get kind of stuck to that nest location so we don't scoop her off. And then we just track her. These are now 10-day cycles. You can see over the next 2 weeks, 20 days, and then at 27 days she hatches and she leads her brood off. This distance, you know, the first 3 or 4 days are right here. She doesn't lead her brood more than maybe 100 meters off of her nest location. She's moving them very slowly through this dense sagebrush. It's a nice wet mesic area early in the year that has a lot of forbs, good grass cover. And she just moves her brood away from the nest slowly during that early brood rearing period. So this is an example of how we can use the data to really understand what the birds are doing and their nest behavior or any other behavior that they're exhibiting out there. So I guess moving now to brood rearing, understanding the brood rearing demographics. We see actually very low brood survival. This is Leslie's thesis. She studied 37 different broods over 3 years and found the brood survival, and that's the probability that at least one chick in a brood survives to recruitment or to basically abandonment by mom. She found that ranged from 3 to 16%. So it was fairly low. It was really driven by precipitation and the availability of resources on the landscape. Some interesting things she found though, chick age and hatch date influence the probability that a brood is going to survive. So I don't think chick age is necessarily surprising. You know, the older a chick gets, the more likely it is to survive. But hatch date, the later in the year a nest hatches, the more likely that that hen brood is going to survive. We think that's tied to the resources that are available later in the year, and probably the reason that our re-nesting attempts are more successful as well. So we also found that brood site selection, similarly to nests, was influenced by that lateral visual obstruction, or the amount of vegetation growing between 0 and 9 inches on that brood site. We also found broadleaf fork cover and abundance of insects. Leslie had this giant, like a square meter. It was like a shop vac that had been modified to, it had a big square meter, and it was like a giant vacuum sucker. And she put it on the ground, suck out all the insects, spend the winter counting those and quantifying the biomass of insects. And she found that insect availability was positively correlated with brood site selection, except for beetles. Beetles, that was the one insect group that was negatively correlated with brood site selection. We think there's a reason for that. There's some papers recently that have come out about beetles and their use of sagebrush habitat. We think it's a habitat effect more than they're afraid of beetles. But that is something that we're going to look at a little bit further. And here's an example, you know, again, daily survival rate versus chick age. You can see that as the chick age increases, the probability of survival increases. The same is true with hatch date. The later in the year that nest hatches and that chick hatches, the more likely that that brood is going to survive. And then here's the insect data. You can see as insects increase, the probability of a hen selecting that site for her brood increases substantially. So space use and movement patterns. So that's kind of an overview of the demographics. The space use and movement patterns, this is where the GPS data really become interesting, I think. It allows us to really look at landscape use. It allows us to identify important seasonal habitats. It provides PCW data to help them make siting decisions to try to minimize impacts to the population where it's practicable where they can actually do that. We've got some good examples of where that's happened. It also enables our pre and post construction comparison of use and space use and how the home ranges might change as the wind energy project is constructed and operated. And then one interesting aspect, and I'll talk a little bit about this, it allows us to evaluate the spatial and temporal aspect of the policy and management decisions that you all are making. The effectiveness of the various buffers around LEX. It allows us to look at how much use actually occurs within those areas and provide some useful information for all of you, I think, to see how you're doing. What we found is you'd expect seasonal home ranges really vary across our study areas. Our study areas are all enough different that the birds use them in different ways and for different seasons. We find that a relatively small proportion of landscape is used in each season by the grouse population as well. Only about 8 to 10% of the available landscape is used at any given time. This gets to what Gary was talking about. Knowing where the grouse are and the resources that they're using is important when we're citing our conservation measures. We need to make sure we match up our conservation efforts with the locations that are actually going to benefit the population. Interestingly, we found that home range is largest in winter, smallest as you'd expect during nesting, early brood, when the birds really are not moving or are moving very short distances. Here's an example of that proportion of the landscape used. The home range size on the y-axis is the proportion of the available landscape. I should say how that's quantified. Basically, what we did is we took the home ranges of all the individual birds and drew a minimum convex polygon around those home ranges to define kind of the available landscape. Not all of it's suitable habitat, but it is the available landscape. The next step would be looking at the suitability of the habitat within that landscape to see where it matches up with the bird use. And you can see less than 2% of the available landscape generally is used by our tagged population. Over 5 years, we feel like our tagged population is representative of the population that's out there. So we are seeing that a lot of our birds are using a small piece of the landscape. They have a high degree of fidelity to certain habitats, the entire population does, and that doesn't really vary year to year. We also find, and I apologize again for the psychedelic colors, it just helps to kind of illustrate things. We see that in each of our blocky study units, there's differences in how the birds use the habitats of those areas seasonally. You can see during lekking, and this is important to point out, we try to maintain a balanced tag count in each of our study areas. This is important so we understand and can compare changes as they occur in the future as the wind project is operated. So we start off with about 20% of the tags distributed in each of our treatment or control areas. And then we track the use of those tags and the hens in our tag, the use of the habitats in the study areas through time. And you can see, I'm going to illustrate just the top three. In the Sierra Madre and Sage Creek Basin, those areas are characterized by higher elevation, wetter areas. And you can see an influx of birds during nesting, early brood, late brood, and early autumn. So a lot of the birds on chokecherry and portions of these other two areas actually are moving out of the dry habitats that don't provide those early brood, late brood, and early autumn habitats, and they're moving into the higher elevation. Similarly, once the snow flies, those birds are getting out of there. They're heading back to these other three areas for wintering habitats. So we're able to look at how that habitat use changes, the proportion of the use or the landscape in each of those areas changes, and how the population is different in their use of the landscape. Another really interesting application, and this is where we get to kind of the policy evaluation piece, is we can look at the proportion of use within various buffers, various times of the year. This is an example we use for male space use during lekking, and we'll do the same thing for hens. And the hen use will answer Bob's question. Male space use during lekking, these are basically the use patterns by the birds during their lekking season when they're actively on the leks. And we looked at the 2-mile buffer that is commonly implemented by BLM and the resource management planning processes, the 0.6 of a mile buffer and the 1/4 mile buffer that are also used by the BLM, but are also specified in the executive order. And we saw that 99% of all male relocations, almost 100% of our birds, are using those areas within 2 miles of a lek. The ones that aren't are transitioning to other leks. So it's just transitional movements from one lek to another that results in the use outside of the 2-mile buffer. What I was most surprised with is the proportion of use within 0.6. 80% of all male use during the lekking season occurs within 0.6 of a mile of a lek. I didn't expect it to be that high, but really that 0.6 of a mile buffer does support the vast majority of the male birds that we have tagged. Where they're outside of that 0.6 of a mile buffer, we believe it's habitat related. You can see here, these are abandoned, they're dryland wheat fields. They're on the east side of the Overland Trail Ranch, east of the North Platte, one of our control areas. And you can see there's a definite avoidance of those areas by the birds. And Gary's going to show a really interesting slide about this here in a second. You can see where it does occur outside of the 0.6 of a mile buffer, it's associated with the birds moving out to find suitable habitat. So really the habitat is the other piece of these buffers we have to consider. If the buffer has suitable habitat, the majority of the use does occur within that 0.6 of a mile buffer. And we also looked at the 1/4 mile buffer. The 1/4 mile buffer still provides 50% protection of 50% of male use. So it does provide a substantial amount of protection for those birds. And this is an illustration of that across the landscape. This is the estimates of use by males during the lekking season. And you can see how tightly it's associated with the lek locations. The black circles around the leks are the 0.6 of a mile buffer. And you can see that 0.6 mile buffer on some of these leks looks like it's drawn around the male use patterns. Where it's not, like I said, east of the North Platte where we have those agricultural fields, it's habitat related. So we kind of have to understand both to understand how we're going to affect the population. In space use, and this gets at Bob's question, we looked at it in the same way. And during lekking, the birds are definitely associated with leks, but you can see that they are offset a little bit. If you look at the 0.6 of a mile buffer in these areas and compare it to the males, you can see that the hens are off finding suitable nest locations, trying to just basically foraging, just normal behavior for the most part. And they only come to the lek a very small proportion of the time. Only 4% of hen use occur within a 1/4 mile of a lek during lekking, and only 3% during nesting. The same was true within 0.6 of a mile. So only 23% of hen use occurred within 0.6 of a mile during lekking, 20% during nesting. So I think this is an indication that there could be some distance effect with nest success, and it could just be a selection on the part of the hen. They're not going close to those lek locations for some reason, habitat, predator related, we don't know. But there definitely could be some distance effect. The 2-mile buffer, though, that is implemented at least on federal lands at this point to protect nesting hens and broodering hens, protected 85% of lek and nest activity. So it is protective of the vast majority of our birds. So now, just a little bit more eye candy, because the GPS information is really cool. I'm going to kind of look at our control area in space use. And if you remember, our control areas are these black lines. They're associated with core area habitats. So we have, if you remember, the kernels you're going to see are not representative of the population as a whole. They're representative of our tagged population, which is evenly distributed among these 5 different controls and treatments. So you can't really compare the two, but it does give you a good idea of space use by the control and treatment area birds. So that the control area birds, which are in core, spend 90% of their time, 90% of their use occurs in core across all seasons. So the core area is protecting 90% of all use by the birds in this population. And that's pretty consistent across the board. You can see as you move into Lecking, that's 93%, nesting, 95%, early brood, 93%, late brood, 92%, and the pattern continues until you get into late autumn as the birds distribute to their winter habitats. And then finally winter. We do have a few birds that are wintering. Some of the birds out of the Sierra Madre treatment areas or control areas come into this area of chokecherry for wintering habitats, but the majority of our control area birds utilize these two areas, primarily these two areas for winter use, both of which are in core. So even during winter, 82% of the core area or control area birds are within core area. And almost the opposite pattern is observed in treatment area hens, and I just noticed I misspelled treatment. You can see, again, our treatment area hens are associated with these non-core area birds, and you see the exact same pattern. Those birds stay primarily in or outside of core, 89% again, outside of core for the entire year. Same during Lecking. They do start to move. You can see during nesting, you see some encroachment here into the core area along Miller Hill. Early brood, that increases a little bit more. Late brood, early autumn. And then just like their counterparts in the control areas, the treatment area birds move back across out of the high elevation habitats and into the wintering habitats. We see that our treatment area hens utilize some small patches of sagebrush just south of the chokecherry development area, and then portions of the chokecherry development area itself. This is an interesting pattern here. This is a small crescent of sagebrush in the middle of an otherwise kind of basin of saltbush. It really doesn't look like much when you're out there. But that area, now I'm really messing up here. That area is one of the areas that Power Company of Wyoming has identified with some of their design features. The haul road for the project used to come right through the middle of that. Working with their project engineers, we've actually routed the major haul road around that habitat patch to maintain that patch, because it's used not only for winter habitat, but also transitional habitat from summer to winter, or Lecking and nesting back over to summer habitat. So it's a transitional habitat and corridor that's used by a number of birds. So I don't know how much time I have left, but we didn't close, Bob? We have 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes? So I got to hurry. So, because Barry still has something. I'm just going to blow through some of this stuff then. Just more interesting space use. Another interesting thing we've seen are day-night patterns of use, different uses, day versus night. And then use of agricultural areas, irrigated hay meadows, and the importance of those hay meadows to certain portions of the population, and the fidelity and repeatability of their movements in and out of those areas. Very interesting patterns we've seen. As I mentioned, we're also going to be looking at hen transition dynamics. You can see the hens do bounce around to different leks. Some of our hens use 7 or 8 different leks in a given season. So the transition probability in hens is much higher than males. And then the coolest movement we have, this is Miller Hill here. This is the Delaney Ren Core area just north of Adobe Town. And we have a bird move. We have 2 seasons. She moves 60 miles to and from summer and winter habitat. So these birds will make long distance movements. And we do have portions of our population that are resident and migratory. So it's a really neat population to look at. Eagles like to eat sage grouse tag there that we recovered. And then I guess next steps, and then Gary's got a few minutes. Next steps is really to continue this, look at the effects of the wind energy development on the grouse population and the things that the demographics and space use that we're measuring. So yeah.
All right, well, thank you, John. So, sorry about that. We lost the presentation. There we go. I just want to wrap things up. This will just take a couple of minutes and talk about planning and next steps and where we are in the process. So, I'll go through this really quickly. You know, over the years, we have really substantially redesign the project as we went forward. So we started with our original application back in 2007. You know, our original proposed plan of development here cited turbines in the areas where we had the highest wind energy. So this was the layout we initially started with, but considered only the wind energy potential of the property and how to maximize the wind energy potential of it. You know, through the years, we've redesigned this project a number of times. We considered both engineering constraints and also environmental constraints when it come. I'll pause here just for a minute. So in August of 2010, we redesigned the project to move all the turbines and infrastructure out of core area. So everything was moved into the non-core area for the project going forward from this point on. You know, in January 2012, again, engineering refinement, I'll pause here just for a minute. So July 2012, this is working with the Fish and Wildlife Service and looking at our eagle usage. We've done, at this point, completed 3 years of eagle surveys and eagle usage. And we identified these high eagle usage that are shown on the far screen, kind of a bright red or pinkish color. And we committed not to place any turbines within these areas because this is where we see the highest eagle usage within the entire project. These are mostly ridge lines, movement corridors and such. Down in the basin there, just north of the Rio Sierra Madre, is where we see most of our eagle activity. They're in there foraging, feeding on rabbits, sagebrush, etc. You know, then we get to this revision 5. This is phase 1. This is our initial layout prior to our resource surveys. And then revision 6, this was our final layout. So this took into account all of our sagebrush data, our eagle use data. It also looked at opening some areas out that were identified as being important prey base areas for eagles. So areas where we have white-tailed prairie dog towns and other areas where we saw eagle activity and use. This is the layout we have today for phase 1. This is a 500 turbine layout, and then phase 2 will come after this. So future conservation moves. So we talked about our CCAA and pursuing that. So we looked at what we could do in the future and add to our CCAA as far as future conservation measures. I'm going to pause just for a minute. I'm trying to go through this fast, but this is a really interesting area. So this is that southeast area John pointed out. And these are all locations of sage-grouse in this area. And you see something that becomes really plain. These are those relic agricultural fields John talked about. So these were dryland wheat fields back in the 70s. It didn't pay out for the farmer, so these fields were abandoned. And then what he did is just put crested wheat in the fields upon finishing it. And you can see we have essentially no sage-grouse utilization of these. A couple of interesting things, and these are the photo points, the yellow and the white one. So you can kind of see there's a little bit of brush and cover coming back in that area. And up here you see that we do get some sage-grouse usage. One of the things interesting, this also was a field, this was some really rough terrain here, so it was never plowed up. It was left in sagebrush. So we have our native vegetation community here, and all around it was plowed under and planted in. We now crested wheat. Again, you see no utilization of that area. So one of our ideas is to take these areas and see if we can speed up the succession here by either planting, establishing a shrub overstory here, putting in rabbit brush, maybe transplanting sagebrush, do something to get the sagebrush. Given our GPS data and what we're doing, we should be able to measure that response. So if we can get sagebrush to use these fields, we will see that conservation uplift. The other things we proposed, again, fairly standard stuff, you know, enhancing water resources. We talked about how dry some of the areas of the ranches are. We have over 100 water wells out there. Most of the time they're shut down and the cows are in the pasture. But maybe there were things we could do to open up those wells and let the water run and create saturated soils and additional vegetation. Reclaiming non-essential ranch roads, that's kind of a no-brainer. If you have roads that aren't ever being used, to reclaim those roads, put them back into native vegetation, just makes sense and creates additional habitat. Eliminates the fragmentation that comes along with them. Of course, modifying more fences, we're always looking for additional opportunities to remove fences or modify them or mark them where we find incidences. And The other thing we committed to do with Game and Fish is to take about 27,500 acres of our ranch and place it in a conservation easement for the benefit of sage-grouse. So we're looking at taking these areas in core area and putting those in a conservation easement. Because this is within the checkerboard, and we manage the grazing within these areas with the BLM. The BLM comes along with this. This would protect about 50,000 acres in a conservation easement for the benefit of sage-grouse. So just to kind of wrap it up, I think we have designed this project smart from the start, to borrow somebody else's term. Every step of the way, we've used best available science, and where the best available science wasn't good enough, we went out and applied more science. We considered sage-grouse impacts, eagles, as we've gone through this project. We have really designed it trying to minimize the footprint impacts on the environment. You know, one of the questions we also get asked as we talk about our CCA with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is, what if everybody did this? We are using our CCAA in a bit of an unconventional way by introducing an additional treatment in the form of the wind farm, with no less authority than Michael Bean has reviewed it and said it is an appropriate use of the CCAA if we can meet the CCAA standard. So I see Pat nodding. So, you know, to look at that, what if everybody did this? What if everybody did spend millions of dollars studying their sage-grouse within their project area or impact in the area? What if everybody spent millions of dollars doing conservation measures? We don't even have a permit to build the project yet. Yet we've already implemented this program that's spent millions of dollars in studying. So we think if everybody did this, then it would preclude the need to list the sage-grouse, which is the CCAA standard. So with that, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And Bob, do we have time for questions?
A couple, yeah, and then he'll be here at lunch too, so people could visit with you over lunch. Are there a couple questions? Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Gary, I assume the cattle operation there is run for profit. It's not just a corporate thing that you could write off.
Yeah, to the extent anybody makes money with cattle these days, yes.
The point being, are you analyzing, you showed this slide of the change in the habitat, there's a change in grazing. Are you looking at the economics of that? Can you show that even doing this, we sold more pounds of beef to show the economic side of the livestock grazing?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I guess we haven't looked at it that way. You know, we do run the cattle operation as a for-profit business, and every year it's held accountable to make money. And so from that standpoint, we do make money off of it. I guess we haven't looked at it in terms of what we're maybe giving up or gaining through the conservation measures.
That would be the other side of that. Have you lost it?
Oh, right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The analysis.
And no, we haven't ever looked at that. I mean, we lightly stock the ranch in general. So, I mean, and that is just kind of consistent with the way we manage it. We've always done it that way since we purchased the ranch. We bought it was originally a sheep operation, and frankly, it was pretty beat down. So, you know, we took the sheep off, put cows on it, and we generally don't get anywhere near our allotments or allow the ewes on the property.
And it's entirely yearling business, right?
Yes, at this point, it was cow-calf. The last few years, it's all yearlings at this point.
Okay, one more, and then we're gonna move on. We good? Yeah, go ahead.
How many eagles do you expect that you would take over the lifetime of the project or something like that?
That's a good question, and I might even turn to Mark to answer that. I say that our discussions with the Fish and Wildlife Service are continuing over that very issue. So we've done a lot of work. They do have a model. We've run through their model. We have a model that we use as well. We're not quite in alignment, but we're probably not too far off. And from my standpoint, I think that number will be in the EIS the service is doing. And I'm not sure that, you know, generally speaking, the service hasn't released that number yet.
We'll just take that as a yes. And as that comes forward, I'm sure that that'll be made public. I just want to say thank you very much, guys. This is a great presentation. And the one thing I would point out is that, and Gary can tell you this, this didn't happen easily. The design certainly was contentious from the outset. But the value of what we're learning about areas that are not even going to have an impact cannot be understated, because they took on a lot more than what they would be required by law. They look at analyzing things, and our hat's off to you, Gary. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Okay.
for your time.
You bet.
Hey, Bob,
yeah,
wherever the tags are, if they could just give them back to me.
I think I can tell you that I would check Tom Christensen's truck.
There's one tag that doesn't work, so it's kind of
The sky is falling in Wyoming right now, and Game and Fish is probably hoarding your tags.
well, they are a partner in the research effort, so that should be appropriate.
All I know is that the wing barrels down there say, please return tags here.
They do. We have a lot of tags.
All right, great. We have one more presentation, which was scheduled for after lunch. I'm going to bump it up, give us a little more time this afternoon. Jason Mead is here, and you guys want to talk a little about this water development WDC project in Core.
Thank you. I'll try to talk loud enough. If you can't hear me, yell at me and tell me I need to speak louder. I'm Jason Mead, Deputy Director of the Dam and Reservoir Division at the Wyoming Water Development Office. Also here today are some of the consultants that we've worked with on this project over the years with Mark Donner with Tri-Hydro, Chad LeBeau with West Inc. Greg Johnson's also been heavily involved with this project, but he's out of the country in Jamaica right now, so couldn't be here today. Appreciate you guys giving us a few minutes here to talk about this project today, and I know it's almost lunchtime, so we'll try to be quick. But feel free to ask questions at any time if you do have them. We'll be pretty informal here. Just a quick background. The Water Development Commission is a state agency. We receive our funding from mineral severance taxes. So we're taking funding from revenues from developing a non-renewable resource and investing them in the renewable resource of water developments. The Dam and Reservoir Division in particular is working on about 15 different reservoir or potential reservoir projects throughout the state right now at the request of local communities. The overriding theme of these reservoirs are to try to hold up that early spring runoff that we can't use because there's more water in the stream that can be used. You're early enough in the season where you're not growing crops yet. That April, May, early June time period, hold that water up in a reservoir so it can be put to beneficial use later in the season and have some environmental benefits as well. So a lot of that is geared towards irrigation, late season irrigation, supplemental irrigation. The project we're talking about today is Alkali Creek. That's one of the projects we're looking at. It has a sage grouse component. That's why we're here today to talk to you guys, the committee. And one of the unique things about this is it's probably not an oil and a gas project. It's a reservoir project. And I don't know if you see a lot of those or not. I've been to a few of your meetings, but we've had some discussions with the Worland BLM field office, as well as the Habitat Protection Program staff at Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And they suggested that we can present this project to you today. So here we are. Just to give you a quick idea of where we're at in the state, the whole screen here is the state of Wyoming as a reference. So we started out looking at the Norwood watershed as a whole. Manderson, Hyattville, and Tensleaf are all located in the watershed to give you an idea of where it's at, part of the Bighorn River drainage. We've got Bighorn Mountains on the east, Bighorn River on the west. The Alkali Creek project is located on Alkali Creek, hence the name, right about in this area, just west of Hyattville. It's off channel. It's tributary. Alkali Creek is tributary to the Paint Rock Creek, and the location of the project is actually half in and half out of the core area. It's right on the western side of this core boundary. And when we initially started looking at it, doing the DDCT analysis, existing impacts, mostly of them being agricultural, were above that 5% threshold. But upon further evaluation and what we'll talk more about today, is we've had our consultants do a habitat evaluation, and it looks like the majority of that area that we're looking at having that project in is unsuitable habitat. Just to give you an idea of the project timeline, we were approached by landowners within the NOAA drainage back in 2007. They were being heavily impacted by drought conditions. Again, watching that early stream flow passing by when they couldn't use it. And we're looking at opportunities on how can we make this system better, store that, put it to use later, also improve wildlife habitat, fisheries habitat, so on and so forth. We started off the watershed study here, and I won't get into all the details of our different processes that we go through at the Water Development Office, but watershed study not only looks at irrigation shortages and storage potential, but it also looks at conservation opportunities. We work with local landowners to look at irrigation rehab potential, upland water developments, stream rehabilitation work. We pile that all into a management rehab plan. We develop a lot of GIS information, background data that we can potentially use as a NEPA foundation when we get to looking at trying to permit storage potential. And it also allows us to have a lot of interaction with that local community. So this is a locally driven process. From that watershed study, it was apparent that there was water shortages, and there was a need. So purpose and need to move forward. And throughout the years since then, oops, what I had.
I have no idea.
I'll keep going, America.
Oh, yeah, right.
In the years since the watershed study, we've just continually tried to refine information through our feasibility study analysis. So we've continually refined information, done a lot of hydrologic work and field work in addition to that. So this is just a general idea of how the watershed study. We came up with 40 different potential reservoir sites throughout the No Woods watershed. This is a unique watershed, but maybe it's not unique. There's no one particular reservoir site that can take care of all the needs, so it's going to be numerous reservoirs in the end. But these original sites were developed from old reports, scouring topo maps, going out in the field, talking with the local community. And as we move forward through our feasibility analysis, we looked at all the things that go into a good reservoir site. And that's not just, well, one of the most important things is can we meet the needs with that site, and do we have water available to store, obviously. But probably the second most important is the last on the list, and that just happened by accident. But when we try to permit a reservoir site, we have to be thinking about 404 permitting in NEPA and LEDFA, the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. So you're looking at wetlands, sage grouse in this instance, cultural resources, big game habitat, numerous things on what these environmental impacts will accumulate to on each one of these reservoir sites. From that, we honed in on basically 5 sites in the NOAA drainage, and one of them being Alkali Creek. Some of these other ones fell off due to various factors, which I won't get into because of lack of time today, but Alkali Creek and Meadowlark Lake are 2 sites that we think are very defensible when it comes to NEPA, 404 permitting. Local community is very supportive of these projects and wants to see them happen. The local community has invested a lot of time. They're actually in the process of forming a watershed improvement district, so they can work with the state agency Water Development Commission through funding as a funding partner. And the commission has gone through the process of putting together an appropriation request for the legislature this year for design and permitting funds, which is in the range of about $4 million to pursue this Alkali Creek project. Meadowlark Lake is about a year behind Alkali Creek. It's outside the core area, so I won't get into that, but it's simply a small enlargement of an existing reservoir. So I'm going to hand it over now so we can talk more about kind of the project layout. Mark's going to cover that, and then Chad's going to get into the DDCT analysis as well as the habitat evaluation.
Okay, just run through here quickly, just give you a little better idea of how the project sits. It is located, as Jason said, Paint Rock Creek drainage. So little kind of high hill sets over right there, center of the screen to the west of the, or rather east of the site. Paint Rock Creek comes down and flows into the Noah. The Noah River is just off the screen here and then flows up north towards Millerton, toward the Bighorn River. So you can see here's our site location. It is located on Alkali Creek. Alkali Creek's an intermittent stream, pretty much stream flow early part of the year. There's a little bit later in the year just with some artesian wells that are located upstream of it. So it is somewhat of an off-channel reservoir. We're going to be primarily filling it with flows from Paint Rock Creek and also Medicine Lodge Creek. We have some existing irrigation ditches up there that we're going to be using for our feeder ditches. Right now there's the Anita supplemental ditch, which actually kicks flow from Paint Rock Creek, which is a larger drainage up there, into Medicine Lodge Creek, and then from there flows kick into the Anita ditch, which is then used for most of this irrigation in this area. So we'll be looking at enlarging this existing ditch some to provide capacity to fill this reservoir in a fairly short amount of time. And then once the reservoir is filled, we'll be releasing flows, meet some of our downstream needs, and then also meet some upstream needs just through exchange. Reservoir, just a couple quick dimensions on it, about 7,600 acre feet. It's not a large reservoir. When you think of reservoirs, but it does go quite a ways to help with some of the legacies and shortages that we have up here in the watershed. We'll be putting in about a 2,500 foot long embankment, earthen embankment across here. And the next slide, I'll show that a little better. We don't have the core area shown on here. We'll have it on a couple slides coming up, but generally it comes in here about where this Anita ditch is and then runs right up Alkali Creek here before it splits off and kind of follows this bridge. So we did end up with a site, as Jason was describing, it's basically split right in half by the core area, with the eastern portion of the site as well as all this area being within the core area, and then the western side out here being out of it. So here's just a close-up of the site itself. This black line is the core area boundary through here, so you can see this falls out White Creek right up to the side. Again, here's that existing ditch that we'll be enlarging to feed the reservoir embankment. We'll have a spillway coming down off over here and then dropping back into Alkali Creek. We'll also be doing some minor improvements going downstream along Alkali Creek, just in terms of we're going to take a stream that typically sees intermittent flow, and we're going to be putting a little more flow down as well. We'll be doing some different things in there, just for rock checks and actually some habitat structures, different things like that. Again, about 2,500 foot long embankment in here. Just in terms of land ownership, you can see this is all BLM up here, so we got roughly about a third to half of the project falls within BLM, and then the rest of it falls on private land ownership. We do have our private landowner, in this case, is a big supporter of the project. He's on the steering committee for the overall watershed project that Jason described. So I'm just going to step through a couple more slides here to show just some photos, just to give you an idea of what the area looks like out there. And then Chad's going to spend a little more time and actually talk about our DDCT analysis and then some of their habitat evaluation that they completed out here. So just to orientate you a little bit, we're going to look at a photo in here and then a photo in here. So this is the first photo, just again give you an idea of what the habitat looks like. So this again is in the core area. Primarily greasewood is what we have out there. Roughly that high water line for the reservoir would run, in this area. So we'd be impounding into here.
And what transect that relates to?
He'll actually, Chad will jump in and run through some of the transects, and we'll have, as he goes through there, we have a slide that'll show those transect locations on there. It's down in the probably transect 9 to 10 range. Here's just a photo from, this is basically the center of the reservoir. In here, Alkali Creek is off to the west, back here in the background. Couple more photos. This one, next one we're going to look at is just the upstream end of the reservoir. So this is, we impound water up into these small drainages up here. At our extreme high water line, we'll have a little bit of water conduit up in here. You can see the center pivot irrigated area in the background. Again, most of what we have out in here is greasewood. We do have some wetlands on site. We've done some wetland delineation, but that's primarily just the riparian area along the drainage down here. So looking across the center of the reservoir area, your Alkali Creek flows right through here. We'd be impounding this entire area in here. And primarily just looking at greasewood out across that area. So that's really just the basics in terms of the layout of the site. Let Chad talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so we came in and assessed the potential impact of the reservoir to sage grouse and sage grouse habitat. We first did a standard DDTC analysis, and we considered two analysis areas. The green is the analysis area including the proposed reservoir and embankment. The larger red area includes the Anita ditch or the conveyance into the reservoir. We looked at the total disturbance within both areas, and we just looked at the all proposed disturbances in red. We saw the total existing disturbance to be 8.7%. And then our proposed project disturbance would increase that disturbance threshold by approximately 0.33%. So this is the entire analysis area. You notice the LECs are 1, 2, and 3 within 4 miles of the facility, but they're approximately 4 miles from the reservoir.
Oh, yeah, dude, I think you're.
No, there's no point in it wrong.
I think a bad thing.
Oh, there you go. So our second step was to conduct a habitat suitability analysis to further evaluate sage grouse habitat. We considered our analysis area to be the proposed reservoir along with the embankments that overlap the sage grouse corridor. And here's the boundary again for your reference. We followed the habitat suitability analysis that followed the methods of the core area strategy and the BLM habitat assessment framework. We established 12 transects within 3 different habitat land cover types. And I'm going to go ahead and step through the series of pictures with each transect. And ultimately, the results of the suitability analysis determined that none of the land covers had sagebrush cover greater than 5%. So transects 1, 2, 3, and 4 up at top here are all in the greasewood flats land cover type and primarily composed of greasewood. And as we move along to the desert scrub along the eastern edge here, transects 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 were all in the desert scrub shrub, and we did detect some sagebrush along these transects, but again, none of them were greater than 5%. Some of the sagebrush intersecting there are transect lines. Then our transects 9, okay. Yeah, transects 9, 11, and 12 were all in agriculture, and again, those did not have any shrub going to them. So in summary, our sage grouse assessment determined that we did have the LECs within 4 miles, but they're approximately 4 miles from our proposed disturbance. The total existing disturbance within our DDTSC analysis area was 8.7, and then our project disturbance at unsuitable habitat was 0.33%. So the results of our analysis indicated that most of our disturbance is within unsuitable habitat, and we likely would not increase the overall disturbance threshold. And some of the results are indicated in the reports that we passed out, so we can further look at the transect information.
So I'm not a sage grouse expert, but we've got some folks on our team that know a lot more about it than I do, thankfully. And I'd also like to maybe just add one thing
You can add the lights.
as far as storage goes, and this project in particular. is that maybe think about it not as just a potential impact, but as maybe a potential benefit. Considering lake bird rearing habitat, which I think I heard earlier, we're going to have fringe wetlands that develop. We're going to have some wetland mitigation to do out there. We should see riparian benefits downstream of the reservoir on Alkali Creek, and just the late season irrigation water that we're going to see in those surrounding fields that can utilize that water in July, August, into September could potentially be a benefit, not just an impact of the project. So with that, I guess I would encourage any questions or really look to your guys as the committee's feedback on this, knowing where we're at with looking to move forward with the project.
Thoughts? Yeah.
Look like, if you could go back to your slide where your vegetation demand specs are located. Why don't you have, this seems like all your transects are located on the kind of the eastern margin of that project. And I'm very familiar with that country. Why do you have any transects to the west?
Yeah, I should clarify that. We only assessed the habitat that overlapped our proposed disturbance within the core area. So this is non-core and this is all core.
Oh, so to the west is non-core?
Yes, sir.
Alkali Creek is the boundary of the core area, the western boundary.
All right.
Brian?
Just wondering, if, first of all, if we have any bird usage data on the area, which I sincerely doubt, but wondering if that was looked for, and if we considered West Nile impacts from those low feeders that would hold little water at the end of the year, which would be a greater impact.
I'm not aware of any bird analysis or bird usage analysis besides some anecdotal information from the local landowner.
I'm not aware of any studies on those studies.
Well, I think you can take both of those as a suggestion in the project design. It would not hurt to do an analysis of bird use. My guess looking at it is you're not going to find any. The suitability itself probably answers that, but it wouldn't hurt to have that as a backstop. I think that's what Brian is saying. And then on the West Nile part.
Yeah, the West Nile, that is something I've thought about or we've talked about. I guess we feel that the size of the water body, we're talking 300 acres or so, that we'd have significant enough wave action that we would not have that problem. And again, this having a reservoir here, I'm not saying that, you are going to have a little bit of backwater area.
That's where you realize, that's what I pointed out as my concern. It's not the body reservoir itself, but the use of those tertiary stream beds that get wet and then slowly seep out.
Right.
Like perfect breeding.
I guess it depends how you look at it. Is it a West Nile impact or is it a habitat improvement? That's for you guys to decide. But and then the other potential for the reservoir, where we've seen in other areas in the Little Snake River drainage, when we can get this late season irrigation water into these communities, it sometimes allows for folks to switch over from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation, which from what I understand could be a benefit as far as West Nile.
Well, on lake river habitat. So that's other issues you want to raise, Lyndon? Go ahead. I am aware. I hesitated to call.
There is quite a bit of sage-grouse usage data in that area, and I think I'm pointing in the right direction. But we've had collared sage-grouse there for about 4 years, and the only, I guess, the biggest potential might be a look at migration patterns across that low area. Those grouse tend to go up on the mountain in the summertime and back down that big flat. So it's been a while since I've looked at some of Aaron's data, and he should be coming out his latest end report at any time now.
Could we get that through the local working group? Would they have that information? Or?
Get it through Lyndon.
Yeah.
Okay. Your name is? I apologize. I don't know.
Lyndon's group with American Coal.
We'll get it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I think, this is why you do DDCTs. It's a good example of how the analysis works. And I think it's great that you could come in and share it because it's a use that we don't normally see or contemplate. I think it's helpful to us to do that. But I think those three things that were raised here would be things we would encourage you to take a look at. Okay. With that, we're going to break for lunch. We'll be back at 1. It'll keep us on track. Thank you. Plan.
Hey, Bob?
Yep.
I'm gonna put a map on the for the cafeteria that's on campus.
Me too. College. Yeah. I'm sure it's important. I know, right? We're gonna go down.
You're right. Yeah, let's go. That's something for. Matt? I guess our yes.
In high school, their lunch period ended noon, so.
Can I join you for lunch?